Chapter 832. The sword Thearka's words were filled with attraction. How many living beings could reject the position of a supreme being? Becoming a supreme was tantamount to becoming the strongest in the myriad of worlds. Although the position of a supremacy was replaced by the old, the shortest period of a supremacy's reign was hundreds of millions of years. Zhou Xuanji did not have the right to refuse, so he could only agree. After that, he asked the Sword Arch to release Namatiani and the others as well. After all, Namatiani was considered half a subordinate of his. The Sword Emperor had no objections and agreed. Then, the Sword Emperor left and disappeared without a trace. Zhou Xuanji took a deep breath and continued to cultivate. Little Sovereign floated to the side, not saying a word. He stroked his chin and fell in a deep thought. After a long while he lamented, "What a great Sword Emperor! This is truly a good method. If you succeed, perhaps you can really become the most powerful supreme being throughout the ages." Zhou Xuanji, who was cultivating with his eyes closed, asked, "What do you mean, the most powerful supreme being?" Currently, the position of a supreme martial artist was not too far away from him. He naturally wanted to understand this domain. Supremes are also divided into strong and weak. Since ancient times, the strongest should be a cardinal heaven expert. At that time, he also encountered attacks from other supremes, but with absolute strength he instantly killed the predecessors, created the divine meridians, and expanded many rules. Be it in terms of strength or contribution, he is second to none. Little Sovereign replied with a look of reminiscence on his face. However, since ancient times, it's extremely rare for the anti-Kunlun Supremes to slaughter their way to the Kunlun origin court, let alone become the strongest Supremes. Zhou Xuanji's emotions surged as he listened, and his eyes were filled with anticipation. Cardinal Heaven, the title of the strongest supreme martial artist. It was unknown if such an existence was still alive. I've always been curious. Since paragons are invincible, why would there be paragons appearing one after another? The previous paragons all went to explore unknown domains, so what are these so-called unknown domains? Zhou Xuanji could not help but ask. This was his biggest doubt. Little Supreme said meaningfully, "The unknown domain is a blank space that the mind can't think of. The Supremes created it with their supreme power. It is above the Kunlun origin court. It belongs to a higher level. Only the Supremes can step into it. Others can't even feel its existence, let alone step into it. Every single supreme being opens a different higher plane, so it's very easy to get lost within. Back then, I tried it and almost died. In the end, I was saved by your opportunity, becoming a soul body." When he mentioned this, he was a little proud, as if he was very proud. Zhou Xuanji narrowed his eyes and asked, "Could it be that my serendipity comes from a higher realm?" It was also very difficult to find the origin of the two words Hongmeng in the Kunlun origin court. Little Sovereign shook his head and said, "I don't know. Maybe it is. With the development of sovereigns, there are too many fields and things that I don't understand." Zhou Xuanji took a deep breath and threw these distracting thoughts to the back of his mind before focusing on his cultivation. Ren Niming's divine power was huge enough for him to continue breaking through. Previously, it took a long time because of the interference of the Supreme Fate, but now that he had removed the Supreme Fate and moved it into the Soul Source Orb, the next step was much more convenient. In less than half a month, he forcefully broke through to the Origin Fusion Divine Lord Fourth Enlightened, and his divine power was far greater than before. He got up and flew toward the Kunlun Origin Court. Next, he planned to absorb Supreme Fate in the Emperor's Sword Divine range. Just as he was about to leave, he suddenly noticed a woman flying toward him. The woman's clothes were covered in blood. Her hair was messy, and she was holding a short sword in her hand. From time to time, she would look back. Obviously, she was being chased. Zhou Xuanji glanced at her, but didn't care. "Senior, save me." The woman suddenly cried out. Zhou Xuanji couldn't help but take another look at her. He suddenly remembered. Isn't this woman the senior brother and junior sister I met before? In this world, he had seen these two people. Naturally, He had memories of them. It was fate that brought us together. Never mind. Zhou Xuanji was waiting for her to fly over. Behind her, thousands of cultivators flew over like an army of locusts. All of them were stepping on their artifacts. Their cultivation was very weak, far from the Saint Realm. In Zhou Xuanji's eyes, they were no different from mortals. The woman flew behind him and cried out in horror, "Senior, save me. I will give you a treasure after this." Zhou Xuanji's face was expressionless. With a wave of his right hand, he directly teleported all the cultivators to the other side of this world. The woman was stunned. She was immediately dumbfounded. Zhou Xuanji stepped into the air and prepared to leave. "Senior, this treasure is for you, to repay you for saving my life," the woman said anxiously. She flipped her right hand and took out a crescent moon-shaped jade. Zhou Xuanji seemed to have noticed something. He raised his right hand, and the crescent moon-shaped jade fell into his hand. Immediately afterward, he disappeared from the spot. The woman was stunned. She hurriedly called out, "Senior? Senior?" Unfortunately, no matter how she called out, Zhou Xuanji didn't show up because he had already left this world. In the space-time tunnel, Zhou Xuanji was flying on the Lesser Supreme Sword while playing with the crescent moon-shaped jade in his hand. This thing actually contains a trace of the power of law. Interesting. Little Sovereign, floating above Zhou Xuanji's head, said in amazement. The power of law in the crescent moon-shaped jade was very thin. It was almost non-existent. But in this mortal world, it seemed very special. Zhou Xuanji carefully observed this trace of power of law. He felt a little familiar. It was very similar to the power of time and space. Back in the passage between the two worlds, he had been with the law of time and space day and night. It should be related to the passage between the two worlds. It seems that Kunlun Origin Court and Anti-Kunlun are getting closer. Once they merge, it will cause unprecedented consequences. Everything may change. Little Sovereign murmured to himself, his eyes turning sharp. Zhou Xuanji crushed the crescent moon-shaped jade and directly absorbed the power of law inside. As for the matter of the two worlds getting closer, he didn't think much about it. As long as I can kill the Sword Emperor, this matter can be solved. He flew forward at full speed. A few hours later, he returned to the Emperor's Sword Divine range. The Emperor's Sword Divine range didn't suffer any damage. It was just that the atmosphere was very quiet. No one was walking around the various layers of the city. It was very desolate. "I'm back. Don't worry, disciples." Zhou Xuanji's voice resounded throughout the Emperor's Sword Divine range, making everyone excited and pleasantly surprised. Zhou Tanhua and Zhou Shaoxian, who were cultivating, also opened their eyes. Zhou Xuanji came up to Jiang Shui. Jiang Shui was studying arrays under a tree. She wasn't surprised to see Zhou Xuanji. Instead, she smiled sweetly and said, "I knew you were still alive." Zhou Xuanji walked up to her and said with a smile, "I can't die for you." Next, he took the initiative to talk about what had happened during this period of time. Jiang Shui listened quietly. After he finished, she asked with a frown, "Then, the most dangerous time is coming. Before, you were only targeted by the Darkness Sovereign and the Sword Emperor. But later on, you might anger the current sovereign." Zhou Xuanji nodded. He then shook his head and said with a smile, "I can only deal with it when it comes." Although he was smiling on the surface, he was very anxious in his heart. He desperately needed to become stronger. The two chatted for a while before Zhou Xuanji returned to the cultivation palace to cultivate in seclusion. After entering the palace, just as he sat down, a bright purple light suddenly burst out his eyes. Chapter 833. The abnormality of the exterminating divine eyes made Zhou Xuanji very uncomfortable. He subconsciously rubbed his eyes. They even stung a little. He immediately probed his eyes with his divine will. He saw strands of power, of destiny, pouring into the exterminating divine eyes from the soul source orb. The exterminating divine eyes were absorbing the power of destiny. It contained the power of time and space. It seemed that the crescent jade had catalyzed this process. Zhou Xuanji calmed down and circulated his energy to help the exterminating divine eyes absorb the power of destiny. Perhaps after this, the exterminating divine eyes would undergo a transformation. Little Sovereign also popped up and said excitedly, "Awesome! Brat, your exterminating divine eyes are about to evolve. Strange, fate and space-time rules have such a miraculous effect." He carefully looked at Zhou Xuanji, trying to see through him. Zhou Xuanji focused on fusing the exterminating divine eyes and destiny rules. During this process, the discomfort he felt was gradually decreasing. The greatly divine suppressor technique was the most suitable cultivation technique for the exterminating divine eyes. It was a powerful cultivation technique improved by the previous owners of the exterminating divine eyes. It had a great effect on creation. Even the supreme fate could be absorbed. Of course, the soul source orb also played a role in this. Little Sovereign looked at it for a while before entering the lesser supreme sword and continuing to sleep. He had consumed most of his soul power to help Zhou Xuanji escape last time. He needed a long time to recuperate. This time, the evolution took a very long time. It took a full 4 months before the evolution of his exterminating divine eyes was completed. But now, his vision was completely different. As he swept his gaze around, all the disciples fell into his eyes. He could see each other's fate. Some were as thin as smoke, some were as strong as a fire, and some were as violent as a gale. When he focused his attention on these great chi, he could see the fate of these disciples. Fate really exists. According to a person's character and environment, there would be rules to deduce their fate. The entire system was extremely huge and complicated. Even he, who was a enlightened origin fusion divine lord, couldn't see through it completely. He turned his gaze to Jiang Shui and found that he couldn't see through her fate. He then looked at Zhou Tianhua, Zhou Shaoxian, Chang Xian, and the others. In the end, he came to a conclusion. He couldn't see through the fate of those who were close to him, but he could see the fate of those who were relatively distant. He wasn't too shocked. After all, he grasped the supreme fate, which was equivalent to jumping out from fate. Everything related to him was a variable. He smiled and retracted the supreme fate in his exterminating divine eyes, no longer prying into the fate of others. Supreme fate was vast and profound. He had only fused it. If he wanted to fully grasp it, he would need more time to cultivate. No matter what, his exterminating divine eyes had become much stronger. Zhou Xuanji's mood turned for the better. He got up and left the cultivation palace to teach the Emperor's Sword Divine Range disciples. While he was becoming stronger, he also hoped that the Emperor's Sword Divine Range would become stronger as well. The current Kunlun Origin Court was still desolate and tense, and very few creatures dared to go out. All the origin cities were like dead cities. All the living beings were holed up in their respective divine ranges, not daring to come out easily. The Sword Arch was still massacring the divine ranges. The divine ranges that he had found could only survive by handing over a 15-star prodigy or an origin law inheritor. Zhou Xuanji did not stop the Sword Emperor. Right now, he did not have the right to stop him. The various super divine ranges and sovereign divine ranges frequently interacted with each other. They wanted to gather the strength of various parties through negotiations. Among them, the Tianyi divine range, the revered Emperor divine range, and the mortal divine range were the most eager. The other 7 sovereign divine ranges were very low-key. They were so low-key that they almost didn't exist. Among the super divine ranges, the most active one was naturally the evil Sky divine range. Beast Sovereign was ambitious. He felt that this turmoil was a good opportunity for him to rise. He recruited soldiers and bought horses, taking in those homeless creatures. The Emperor's Sword Divine Range stayed in a corner and didn't participate in the affairs of the world. Zhou Xuanji devoted himself to cultivation. Under his preaching, the cultivation of all the Emperor's Sword Divine Range disciples rose steadily, making the atmosphere in the Divine Range more and more uplifted, sweeping away the previous panic. Another few years passed. On this day, Zhou Xuanji was teaching Zhou Tanhua how to use the exterminating divine eyes. Changxian appeared beside him, bowed, and reported, "Master, Tianyi Divine Range's Range Master, Nama Tianyi, has come to visit you." Zhou Xuanji replied without turning his head, "Bring him in. That old guy came to see me. Does he have another plan?" Unfortunately, he had already reached an agreement with the Sword Emperor. Nama Tianyi reckoned that he didn't know that he would survive. It was Zhou Xuanji who had spoken. Changxian left. Soon, she brought Nama Tianyi to Zhou Xuanji. The young-looking Zhou Tanhua retracted his eyes and obediently flew to the opposite peak. Nama Tianyi looked at him and sighed. "This is your son, right? I have long heard of him. Even the Sword Emperor wants to snatch him." This sentence wasn't a compliment or sarcasm. Zhou Tanhua's talent had already spread in the Kunlun Origin Court. He had perfectly inherited Zhou Xuanji's exterminating divine eyes and cultivation aptitude. At such a young age, he was already breaking through to the Tao ancestor realm. Maybe he could reach the 9 vast heavens in less than 1,000 years. He could be regarded as the star of tomorrow. Zhou Xuanji asked with a smile, "What's the matter?" Nama Tianyi said with a straight face, "Recently, the divine ranges are going to gather all the range masters and integrate the power of all the divine ranges to resist the Sword Emperor. We have the whereabouts of the sovereign. When he returns, he will definitely defeat the Sword Emperor." Zhou Xuanji wasn't surprised. He asked with a faint smile, "Is the sovereign as strong as the Sword Emperor?" The Sword Emperor was the reverse of him. In his opinion, if he became the sovereign, he would be the strongest among the sovereigns. As for the sovereign, in his impression, he didn't have any particularly great achievements or contributions. He had to be deceived by his subordinates. This made him feel that the sovereign was just SOSO. At least, he was much worse than the other sovereigns. Of course, he's the most powerful existence, Nama Tianyi said excitedly. His face and neck instantly turned red. Although the Sword Emperor is the reverse of you, you can't think that he is absolutely invincible. The danger our sovereign encountered in the past wasn't much weaker than now, but he still managed to break through the encirclement and become the sovereign in the decisive battle that concerned the life and death of the Kunlun Origin Court. He is definitely stronger than the Sword Emperor. At this moment, Nama Tianyi was like a crazy fan in Zhou Xuanji's eyes. "Is he that strong?" Zhou Xuanji waved his hand and said, "Well, tell me, where is the location and when is it?" He didn't say anything about the sovereign's reincarnation, lest Nama Tianyi question him further. At that time, he wouldn't be able to explain himself. "It's in the Sovereign Emperor Divine Range. You must arrive in 76 days, Nama Tianyi replied. He took a deep breath and tried his best to calm his emotions. He hated the Sword Emperor to the bone. The sovereign was his hope. He couldn't allow Zhou Xuanji to destroy this hope. Zhou Xuanji nodded. Nama Tianyi still seemed a little unhappy. He chatted with him briefly before quickly leaving. Zhou Tanhua appeared beside Zhou Xuanji and mumbled, "Is his Tao heart unstable?" Chapter 834. Zhou Xuanji glanced at Zhou Tanhua and snappily said, "He is the sovereign range master. Can a kid like you see through his Tao heart?" Zhou Tanhua scratched his head and smiled, looking a little shy. "Father, are you really going next? The Sword Emperor is your reincarnation. Even if a sovereign returns and defeats the Sword Emperor, your crisis will not end." Zhou Tanhua reminded, "In the battle between the sovereign and the Sword Emperor, no matter who won, Zhou Xuanji's life would be in danger. The Sword Emperor would prove Zhou Xuanji's potential to the sovereign. It could even be said that he was a threat." Zhou Xuanji chuckled and said, "Don't think about things that are too far away. If the Sword Emperor is not defeated, the Emperor's Sword Divine Range will not survive either. Maybe after the Sword Emperor is defeated, I will also have the power to fight against the sovereign. Who knows?" Upon hearing this, Zhou Tanhua's eyes lit up. That's right. Perhaps his father would have already become a supreme martial artist by then. All right, let's continue cultivating. Zhou Xuanji's tone changed and became stern. Zhou Tanhua's aptitude was indeed amazing. In terms of aptitude alone, he wasn't any worse than him. Such a genius was his own son, so there was no need for Zhou Xuanji to hide anything. Now that Zhou Tianhua had grown up and matured, it was time for him to soar into the sky and grow unscrupulously. Under Zhou Xuanji's guidance, Zhou Tianhua's cultivation increased day by day. In the blink of an eye, the day of the gathering of the divine ranges finally arrived. The Tri-Phoenix Qilin carriage was quickly shuttling through the universe. Inside the carriage, Zhou Xuanji, Zhou Tianhua, and Zhou Shaoxian were chatting. Zhou Shaoxian seemed to be the most excited. She clapped her hands and smiled. "Father, this is a great opportunity. If you can grasp it well, you might be able to become the leader of all the divine ranges. How impressive would that be? That's equivalent to half a supreme martial artist." Zhou Xuanji shook his head and laughed. Why was this girl's personality so similar to Xian Xianghua's? On the contrary, Zhou Tianhua looked like Jiang Shui. Zhou Tianhua said helplessly, "Elder sister, whoever becomes the alliance leader will become the target of public criticism. What would the supreme expert think if he saw this? The enemy is father's face, and the most powerful subordinate is also father." When Zhou Shaoxian heard this, she thought about it and realized that it was indeed not a good idea. If it was her, she most likely would not have a good impression of Zhou Xuanji either. "Then I'll really be a spectator this time." Zhou Shaoxian sighed and leaned against the wall. Zhou Xuanji looked at Zhou Tianhua and said, "This time, you have to observe carefully. If you become the range master of the Emperor Sword Divine range in the future, you have to know about the range masters of the Kunlun Origin Court. You have to distinguish who is worth roping in and who you have to stay away from. Under such circumstances, it is the easiest to see one's nature." Zhou Tianhua nodded, his eyes revealing a look of anticipation. Zhou Shaoxian curled her lips and said, "Tianhua is the branch master? What do I think? Should I learn from Annie Xian and establish a sect outside?" After saying that, she actually became excited. Zhou Xuanji was speechless. This girl really looked like Xian Xianghua when she smiled. Zhou Tianhua said with a smile, "All right, how about this? Us two siblings will work together to assist father." The siblings began to talk about this matter, and the more they talked, the more excited they became. Zhou Xuanji did not interrupt, but observed them with a smile. It wasn't bad to have such a pair of children in one's life. They talked and laughed along the way, and they did not encounter any danger or obstacles. The Tri-Phoenix Qilin carriage stopped in front of the venerable Emperor Divine range. The vicinity of the sovereign Emperor Divine range was quiet. Very few creatures came and went. Those creatures disappeared into thin air as soon as they got close to the sovereign Emperor Divine range. Zhou Xuanji wasn't surprised. When the Tri-Phoenix Qilin carriage was less than 10,000 feet away from the sovereign Emperor Divine range, a powerful space-time force moved it away. From the outside, the Tri-Phoenix Qilin carriage seemed to have disappeared into thin air. The next second, the Tri-Phoenix Qilin carriage entered the sovereign Emperor Divine range. Inside the revered Emperor Divine range, every layer was filled with people. This time, the divine ranges are gathering. It is said that the sovereign is there. Is it true? If the sovereign is there, the Kunlun Origin Court can restore peace. With so many heroes gathering, who do you think will become the leader of the Origin Court? Probably Nan Matiani. Sovereign Emperor Dragon, didn't you see that all the divine ranges are gathering in the Sovereign Emperor Divine range? The Mortal Divine Range Master is also possible. Zhou Xuanji heard many voices. In the Sovereign Emperor Divine range, the news about the Divine Range Coalition Army had already spread. The whole range was looking forward to it. Too soon, Namu Tiani sent a voice transmission to Zhou Xuanji. "Brother Zhou, please come to my place. I will ask for the first seat for you." Zhou Xuanji immediately maneuvered the Tri-Phoenix Qilin carriage and flew toward Namu Tiani. After half an hour, the Tri-Phoenix Qilin carriage landed in a mansion in a giant city. After getting off the carriage, Zhou Xuanji put away the Tri-Phoenix Qilin carriage and moved forward with Zhou Tianhua and Zhou Shaoxian. Along the way, many Tiani Divine Range disciples were looking at Zhou Xuanji with curious or complicated gazes. The existence of anti-Kunlun had already spread in the Kunlun origin court. Everyone knew that the Sword Emperor was Zhou Xuanji's incarnation. Therefore, many creatures hated Zhou Xuanji, especially those who had no home to return to after their divine ranges were destroyed. Zhou Xuanji was expressionless. He ignored the strange gazes from all directions. Walking along the stone steps, he saw Nan Mutiani and Wang Buao waiting in the courtyard ahead. As soon as he saw Zhou Xuanji coming over, Wang Buao immediately got up. There was a complicated look in his eyes. Back then, he wanted to experience the power of the Dark Sovereign. In the end, he ended up in a sorry state. Therefore, he was a little embarrassed when facing Zhou Xuanji. However, he was very excited in his heart because he had developed a strong interest in the destiny manifestation technique. He also wanted to learn such a powerful divine ability. "Brother Zhou, you are finally here. Come and sit." Nan Mutiani waved his hand and said with a smile. Nan Mutiani waved his hand and said with a smile. His gaze swept over Zhou Tanhua and Zhou Shaoxian, and he was secretly surprised. Why did this kid bring his children here? After taking a seat, Zhou Xuanji introduced Zhou Tanhua and Zhou Shaoxian to Wang Buao. Wang Buao didn't put on airs. As soon as he saw Zhou Tanhua, he couldn't take his eyes off him. This kid's aura, Wang Buao narrowed his eyes. He remembered that Zhou Xuanji was very young. He didn't expect Zhou Xuanji's son to already have half a foot in the Dao ancestor realm. Such talent inheritance was too terrifying. Zhou Xuanji and Nan Mutiani started chatting while Wang Buao kept staring at Zhou Tanhua. This guy wouldn't have some of the hobbies that Grandmaster mentioned. Zhou Tanhua furrowed his brow as he thought about it. His heartbeat began to speed up. He felt disgusted with Wang Buao. Wang Buao, however, didn't know what he was thinking. He just stared at him, wondering if he should accept him as a disciple. In this gathering of divine ranges, I want to compete for the position of Heavenly King of the Origin Court and lead the Kunlun Origin Court on the road to victory. Nan Mutiani went straight to the point. He stared into Zhou Xuanji's eyes and continued, "I hope you could support me. After all, you are the reincarnation of the Sword Emperor." Zhou Xuanji replied with a teasing smile. "Okay." He could see through Nan Mutiani's thoughts at a glance. He didn't point out that his vision had already surpassed the internal strife of the Kunlun Origin Court. Chapter 835. After Zhou Xuanji agreed to support Nan Mutiani was in a great mood and began chatting with him. This guy didn't get carried away. He still treated Zhou Xuanji as the future sovereign. Zhou Xuanji exchanged pleasantries with him, and time passed. 10 hours later, all the range masters gathered on the venerable Emperor Divine Range's Meridian Convergence Tower. The tower was located at the edge of the city, towering into the clouds, and its top was connected to a platform with a diameter of 10,000 miles. On its edge stood the guards of the venerable Emperor Divine Range, all of whom were Dao-treading saints. Zhou Xuanji, Zhou Tanhua, and Zhou Shaoxian followed Nan Mutiani and Wang Buao into the Meridian Meeting Tower. As soon as they arrived, they attracted the attention of many creatures. Regardless of whether it was Zhou Xuanji or Nan Mutiani, both of them were extremely famous and had high statuses. Naturally, they were eye-catching. Why is Zhou Xuanji with Nan Mutiani? It has long been rumored that the reason why the evil Sky Divine Range was able to avert disaster was because of Nan Mutiani. Could Zhou Xuanji have already joined the Tiani Divine Range? Even if they didn't join, their relationship is definitely not ordinary. Otherwise, how could the Emperor's Sword Divine Range be established so stably? Nan Mutiani must want to support Zhou Xuanji just like the previous sovereign. TSK. It seems that Nan Mutiani is determined to be the Heavenly King of the Origin Court. Hearing the discussions around her, Zhou Shaoxian furrowed her brows and showed a displeased expression. She knew about the relationship between Zhou Xuanji and Nan Mutiani. It was Nan Mutiani who had shamelessly offered to help her father. Why did it sound like Zhou Xuanji had sided with Nan Mutiani? Zhou Tanhua's eyes flickered as he glanced at Zhou Xuanji without saying a word. Nam Matiani was expressionless as he led everyone to the first row of seats in the center of the pagoda. For the pulse meeting, the seats were spread out in a circle with a diameter of 1,000 feet in the center. The adjacent seats were separated by 100 feet. There were only 13 seats in the first row, and 6 of the branch masters were seated. Sovereign Vein Master. Zhou Xuanji glanced at them and found that he had seen them all before. When the Holy Ghost had disturbed the Kunlun Origin Court, these guys had appeared to threaten him. When the Paragon Vein Masters saw him, they were also moved, especially old ancestor Hongshun, who looked at Zhou Xuanji as if he wanted to eat him alive. Brother Zhou, you can sit on the throne beside me. Namu Tiani smiled and sat down. Wang Buao stood behind him and scanned the surroundings. Zhou Xuanji nodded. He walked to the throne and sat down. Zhou Tanhua and Zhou Shaoxian, who accompanied him on both sides, were a little nervous. After all, the range masters of the entire Kunlun Origin Court were gathered here. Tanhua, guess how high their cultivation is? Zhou Shaoxian sent a sound transmission to Zhou Tanhua. She wanted to find someone to relieve her tension. However, Zhou Tanhua did not answer. His gaze locked onto a figure opposite him. That person stood at the side of Supreme Vein Lord. He wore a red-lined golden robe, his face clean and bald, looking like a pretty monk. His palms were joined together, his eyes closed. He felt Zhou Tanhua's gaze, so he opened his eyes and smiled at him. Zhou Xuanji saw the exchange of glances between the two of them. He felt that it was quite funny, but his face remained calm. His son's life had begun. As time passed, more and more range masters took their seats. Seeing Zhou Xuanji take his seat among the range masters, many creatures were questioning him. Beast Sovereign led 2 people to take their seats. It was Ji Huanglin and the withered old man who had stopped Zhou Xuanji from leaving the Evil Sky Divine Range. Does that kid deserve to sit in front? The withered old man said, gnashing his teeth. In his eyes, Zhou Xuanji was a traitor. Ji Huanglin slightly furrowed his brow. He looked at Zhou Xuanji with a very complicated gaze. Beast Sovereign, with an expressionless face, said, the Sword Emperor is his reincarnation. He is likely to become the sovereign in the future. He is naturally qualified to sit there. The junior he once thought highly of was sitting in front of him. He had mixed feelings, but he couldn't show it. He had to pretend that he didn't care. The withered old man let out a cold snort and said no more. After about half an hour, all the range masters took their seats. Of the 13 thrones in the first row, only 2 remained. No one dared to sit. The range master of the Sovereign Emperor Divine Range was called Li Xianwang. He was older than Nam Matiani, but he looked like a young man with a warm smile on his face. Yuan Ruzin stood beside him, glaring at Zhou Xuanji. How long has it been? Zhou Xuanji, whom he regarded as prey, was actually sitting on the same level as the Sovereign Range Masters. It was ridiculous. What made him the most furious was that the Sovereign Range Masters didn't have any objections. Everyone. Li Xianwang opened his mouth. Just these 2 words silenced the entire Range Master Tower. He continued, now, the Kunlun Origin Court has been attacked by the anti-Kunlun Sovereign, the Sword Emperor. Thousands of divine ranges have been destroyed. In the future, the Dark Sovereign will also attack. The Kunlun Origin Court is now in an unprecedented difficult situation. As the Range Master of the Sovereign Emperor Divine Range, I will not talk nonsense with you. I hope that all the divine ranges will unite and fight the Sword Emperor together. Since we want to unite, we need a leader. Our Sovereign Range Master has decided to call him the Origin Court Heavenly King. If you want to become the Origin Court Heavenly King, you must have the strength to dominate the Kunlun Origin Court. At the same time, you must be able to convince the majority of the divine ranges. Remember, it's the majority, not every divine range. He began to talk incessantly. His voice clearly reached the ears of all creatures. Zhou Xuanji listened quietly. He didn't take it to heart. He only had one thought right now, and that was to find out the whereabouts of the sovereign as soon as possible. The Sword Emperor said that the sovereign's fate was related to him. It meant that this person was an old friend of Zhou Xuanji, and it wasn't as simple as a nodding acquaintance. Zhou Xuanji's divine will looked at Beast's sovereign and thought to himself, could it be him? Impossible. If it was him, would the Sword Emperor allow Beast's sovereign to survive in the anti-Kunlun? Zhou Xuanji looked at Ji Huanglin again. Could it be him? Just as Zhou Xuanji was wondering, Li Xuanhuang's speech ended. The Range Master Tower was in an uproar again. All the Range Masters only brought a few people with them. Even so, it was still very noisy when everyone's discussion was added together. Li Xianhuang began to wait. Now, the Range Masters who wanted to become the Origin Court Heavenly King could stand up. If no one else stood up, they would be chosen from these standing Range Masters. For a moment, no Range Master dared to stand up. The Origin Court Heavenly King required strength and fame, and all the Range Masters were gathered here. Even the Sovereign Range Master didn't dare to act rashly. Zhou Xuanji looked at Nam Mutiani and asked with his eyes, "Why haven't you stood up yet?" Nam Mutiani shook his head slightly. He didn't explain through voice transmission. Zhou Xuanji raised his brow. He turned to Li Xianhuang and asked, "The Sovereign Emperor Divine Range is in charge of the range meet. Presumably, you are the Divine Range that knows the whereabouts of the Sovereign. I hope Senior Li can tell us the whereabouts of the Sovereign." As soon as he said this, the uproar came to an abrupt end. All eyes fell on Li Xianhuang. The reason why the Range Masters didn't dare to act rashly was because they weren't sure whether the Sovereign could return or not. Without the Sovereign, the Origin Court Heavenly King was definitely going to die. Chapter 836. Li Xianhuang remained calm in the face of countless gazes. He looked at Zhou Xuanji and said with a smile, "If the revered Emperor Divine Range dares to say it, then naturally there is. But this news can only be told to Heavenly King Origin Court. I hope everyone can understand." He didn't say the reason, but anyone who could become a branch master was a shrewd person and understood immediately. Zhou Xuanji narrowed his eyes. It seemed that the Sovereign Emperor Divine Range did not know where the Sovereign was. This was like forcing a duck onto a perch. Once he became the Origin Court Heavenly King, even if he told the other party that there was no supremacy's whereabouts, would he dare to abdicate the position of Origin Court Heavenly King? At that time, regardless of whether he unloaded it or not, he would still die. Zhou Xuanji knew about the Sovereign, but he was not sure who the Sovereign had reincarnated into. After that, he stopped talking and waited for the branch master to stand up. Time ticked by. After the time it takes for half an incense stick to burn, no one stood up. If it were a peaceful time, there would be a lot of range masters vying for the position of Origin Court Heavenly King. But now, the position of Origin Court Heavenly King meant that they would charge into the enemy lines and face the Sword Emperor. Who would dare? Since that's the case, let me take over. After all, I have experienced many tribulations in the Kunlun Origin Court. Nam Mutiani said. After he finished speaking, he slowly stood up and a majestic aura erupted, enveloping the entire pagoda. At this moment, he displayed his terrifying aura without restraint. If he wanted to be the Origin Court Heavenly King, he had to let all the range masters feel his strength and make them trust him. Li Xianhuang frowned upon seeing Zhang Xian standing up. Obviously, Li Xianhuang didn't know that Nam Mutiani wanted to compete for Origin Court Heavenly King. Zhou Xuanji watched with interest. He leaned forward and supported his chin with his right hand as he watched the show quietly. Nam Mutian stood up one by one, and two of the Paragon branch masters also stood up. Li Xuanhuang's cold expression instantly returned to normal, and a smile reappeared on his face. I'm also willing to become an Origin Court Heavenly King and lead the Kunlun Origin Court to fight against the Sword Emperor. A familiar voice came from behind. It was Beast Sovereign. Zhou Tanhua and Zhou Shaoxian subconsciously looked back, but quickly turned their heads back. After all, they used to belong to the evil Sky Divine Range, so they would always feel a little awkward looking at Beast Sovereign. Among the Super Divine Ranges, apart from Beast Sovereign, no other Super Range Master dared to stand up. All the creatures began to discuss Beast Sovereign. You really don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Be sovereign is too arrogant. He doesn't even know his place. The prodigies nurtured by others are on the same level as the sovereign range lords. It's only natural for him to feel inflated. TSK. It's funny to be surpassed by Junior. Be sovereign is overestimating himself. Let's watch him make a fool of himself later. Most of the living beings were either mocking or joking. In their opinion, it was impossible for Be Sovereign to become an Origin Court Heavenly King. Namutiani shot a cold glance at Be Sovereign. He really hated Be Sovereign. He felt that Be Sovereign was like a reptile that couldn't be trampled to death. If it weren't for Zhou Xuanji, he would have already killed Be Sovereign and flattened the evil Sky Divine range. Now, this guy wanted to compete with him for Origin Court Heavenly King? Why? Zhou Xuanji noticed Namutiani's gaze, but did not speak. He remained silent. Another half an hour passed. In the end, Li Xianwang stood up and said, I am the Range Lord of Sovereign Emperor Divine Range. I believe that my strength is not weaker than anyone here. I also want to be the Origin Court Heavenly King. If I become the Origin Court Heavenly King, I will take the lead and fight the Sword Emperor. Of course, as for who will become the Origin Court Heavenly King, I don't have the final say. The other Range Lords also don't have the final say. His voice silenced the entire tower. Although he said it very casually, it made all the living beings feel the pressure. He was determined to win. Namutiani smiled and said, Range Lord Li, who do you think has the final say? The other sovereign Range Lords also revealed a faint smile. Naturally, it's decided by the will of the sovereign, Li Xianwang said with a smile. He raised his right palm toward the sky. In an instant, billowing thunderclouds gathered out of thin air, making all the living beings feel oppressed. Zhou Xuanji looked up. A look of doubt appeared in his eyes. Could it be the sovereign? He wasn't vigilant. If the sovereign really appeared, the Sword Emperor would probably come too. Although the divine ranges had been very secretive, the Sword Emperor was the sovereign. How could he not know? Zhou Xuanji felt that the Sword Emperor was spying in the distance, waiting for the sovereign to appear. The reincarnated sovereign shouldn't be able to recover his strength in a short time. In other words, as long as the sovereign dared to appear now, he would die without a doubt. The thunderclouds parted as a divine figure appeared. It was towering and majestic like a beam of light. It was impossible to see its formation clearly. Zhou Xuanji narrowed his eyes. He thought of the virtuous Great Formation. How many backup plans did the sovereign leave behind? Could it be that the sovereign is planning something? Wah! All the living beings were shocked. The sovereign still has a will. The expressions of Nanmu Tiani, Beast Sovereign, Old Ancestor Hongshun, and the others changed drastically. None of them had thought of this. If the sovereign's will was helping Li Xianwang, how could they fight against him? Sovereign, tell all living beings, who should be the Origin Court Heavenly King? Li Xianwang shouted loudly. His voice resounded throughout the Sovereign Emperor Divine Range. The drama queen is here. Zhou Xuanji raised his brow. If his guess was right, the sovereigns would say Li Xianwang. Not only him, but other living beings also thought so. If Li Xianwang dared to do this, how could he not be confident? If the will of the Supreme Being did not choose him, why would he stand up and embarrass himself? Shining raised his right hand and pointed his index finger downwards. A beam of light shot out from his index finger and quickly descended. Li Xianwang smiled and opened his arms. Boom! The beam of light suddenly accelerated and fell on Zhou Tanhua, who was beside Zhou Xuanji. Silence. Li Xianwang's smile froze. All the living beings were stunned. Namutiani's eyes were wide open. What happened? Zhou Xuanji's son was chosen by the sovereign to be the Origin Court Heavenly King? Even Zhou Xuanji was stunned. Zhou Shaoxian said excitedly, Tanhua, amazing. I'm going to soar into the sky. She was so excited that she forgot herself, completely ignoring the ugly expressions of the vain masters around her. Surrounded by the strong light, Zhou Tanhua was extremely nervous. He wanted to rush out, but he couldn't move his feet and could only wave his hands. He instinctively looked at Zhou Xuanji and called out in fear, "Father!" Zhou Xuanji took out the lesser supreme sword and pretended to fight. But in fact, he wanted to communicate with Little Sovereign. "Don't panic. I'm here. You won't be in danger." Zhou Xuanji comforted, calming Zhou Tanhua down quickly. Little Sovereign's voice resounded in Zhou Xuanji's mind. "Huh? Is this the Sovereign's inheritance?" "The Sovereign's inheritance?" Zhou Xuanji furrowed his brow. He immediately asked if there would be a price to pay for accepting the inheritance. "It shouldn't be. Although your son's talent is terrifying, what does the Sovereign want at this moment? Even if it's a possession, it needs time to grow. Presumably, this Sovereign's will is left to choose an inheritor. Your son's aura and aptitude just match the Sovereign's will," Little Sovereign said in a solemn tone. Little Sovereign said in a solemn tone. Chapter 837. The Meridian Convergence Tower was silent for a while before it suddenly exploded. "How is this possible? This kid wants to be the Origin Court Heavenly King? Are you kidding me? Li Xianwang is stupid. What's going on? His divine ability isn't done well? Is this a joke? We came all the way here. Do you think we are fools? Do you really dare to let this kid be the Origin Court Heavenly King? He is only half a step into the Tao Ancestor realm. The Sword Emperor can kill him with a sneeze." "Not necessarily. What if the Sword Emperor treats him as his son?" The creatures were discussing among themselves, causing the Meridian Convergence Tower to fall into chaos again. Zhou Tanhua slowly closed his eyes and entered a state of epiphany. The revered Emperor Divine Range's spiritual qi and Tao energy immediately rushed toward him. Li Xuanhuang's face turned ugly at the sight of this. Namatian asked Zhou Xuanji through voice transmission, "What's going on?" Zhou Xuanji glanced at him and shook his head slightly, indicating that he also didn't know the situation. Indeed, could it be that the Sovereign chose Zhou Tanhua because Zhou Tanhua is his reincarnation? But Zhou Xuanji had repeatedly checked Zhou Tanhua's soul. It was very pure, exactly the same as a newborn soul. After all, he had been in the soul source pool and had a deep understanding of souls. "How wonderful," Wang Buao muttered to himself. Wang Buao muttered to himself as he looked at Zhou Tanhua with a strange look in his eyes. The handsome monk next to Li Xianwang narrowed his eyes, deeply remembering Zhou Tanhua's face. Old ancestor Hong Chun coldly snorted and said, Everyone has seen this kid's cultivation. Are you really going to let him be the Origin Court Heavenly King? Isn't this a joke to the Sword Emperor and the Dark Sovereign?" His words made the other Sovereign Range Masters nod in agreement. In their opinion, it was best for the Origin Court Heavenly King to be themselves. Next, it could only be one of the Sovereign Range Masters. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to command the Kunlun Origin Court and wouldn't be able to bring hope to the Kunlun Origin Court. Zhou Xuanji said, "My son is indeed not qualified to be the Origin Court Heavenly King. You should find someone else. But I hope that the seniors will not disturb him. If he could become stronger, it will be the Origin Court's fortune." Hearing this, the expressions of the Sovereign Range Masters changed. It was a good thing that Zhou Xuanji could give them a way out. But seeing Zhou Tanhua obtain the opportunity of the Sovereign, they were very jealous. Li Xianhuang sighed and said in a clear voice, "The person chosen by Sovereign is talented, but he still can't mature at the moment. We have to be responsible for the Kunlun Origin Court. Now, let everyone here vote for the Heavenly King of the Origin Court. Choose from the branch masters who have stood up." Remember, this is not the selection of the Supreme Being. The Supreme Being will return soon. What you are choosing is the strong man who will lead you to resist the Sword Emperor. Strength and ambition are the most important. Those who have powerful cultivation but no courage are not heavenly kings of Origin Court. Domineering. Who else but me can do it? Although Li Xianwang didn't say it directly, everyone could hear the determination in his voice. It was as if he wanted to perish together with the Sword Emperor. Namutiani snorted and said, "That's right. For example, I have already faced the sword the arch head-on and even escaped from his hands. I have experience in dealing with the sword the arch. His voice reverberated throughout the entire tower, and Zhou Xuanji was speechless. How shameless! Old Ancestor Hongshun also said, I am not afraid of the Sword Emperor. Presumably, the branch masters who dare to stand up are fearless people who are not afraid of the Sword Emperor. And Sovereign Hongshun has an inseparable relationship with our mortal divine range. She will definitely help me. No, help the Kunlun Origin Court. Li Xianhuang and Nam Tian's eyelids twitched. The other sovereign branch masters spoke up one after another, stating their advantages. All of them looked determined, making the branch masters in the tower discuss among themselves. Zhou Xuanji was the most relaxed. Most of his attention was focused on the beam of light next to him. Zhou Tanhua was still receiving the inheritance. His cultivation was rising steadily. He had already begun to bear the Dao flower fruit. Once the flower bloomed, he would become a true Dao ancestor. Zhou Shaoxian stood on the side, waiting nervously. Her face was full of expectation. She could also see that this was an inheritance, and it was the inheritance of the sovereign. She asked in a low voice, Father, how powerful will Tanhua become? In her memory, Zhou Xuanji's speed of breakthrough was a legend. When she was sensible, Zhou Xuanji was still wandering in the mortal world. In the Kunlun Origin Court, their age gap was like that of brothers and sisters. If Zhou Tanhua could be like Zhou Xuanji, then the Emperor's Sword Divine range would really rise. Zhou Xuanji replied, Wait patiently. We can't see how powerful he is right now. Although he was looking forward to it, he had to pretend that he didn't care. Only in this way could the other branch masters not find fault with him in public. Just like that, all the branch masters began to vote. They directly said the name of the Origin Court Heavenly King. There was no need to count the votes. All the creatures present had high cultivation. It was easy to remember the names. One by one, the branch masters began to say their names. Starting from the outermost seats, they moved inwards one after another. Li Xuanhuang's voice was the loudest, followed by Old Ancestor Hongshun. Nam Tianyi's voice was far inferior to the first two. This made his face gloomy. He was in a bad mood. He even wanted to leave on the spot. When it was Zhou Xuanji's turn, many gazes fell on him. He smiled and said, Nam Tianyi. Nam Tianyi, who was next to him, forced a smile upon hearing this. By now, Nam Tianyi had no hope. There was no suspense in the final result. Li Xianhuang was chosen as the Origin Court Heavenly King. He said in a loud voice, I won't say much nonsense. The Kunlun Origin Court is in dire straits. I need you to gather the Dao ancestors of your respective divine ranges to the Sovereign Emperor Divine Range. You don't need to think too much. As long as you gather a certain number, I will personally lead the army to fight against the Sword Emperor. After the war is over, as long as we are still alive, you can all go back. My position as the Origin Court Heavenly King will also disappear at that time. His tone was serious, not allowing anyone to refute him. The branch masters were immediately in an uproar, but no one dared to stand up and question him. Nam Tianyi and Old Ancestor Hongshun almost exploded in anger, but they couldn't say anything. TSK, Origin Court Heavenly King, I think it's a joke. Right at this moment, a cold laughter descended from the sky, causing everyone to raise their heads in shock. Sword Emperor. He was dressed in black with his arms folded across his chest, looking down at the pulse-gathering tower. Whoosh! All the creatures immediately got up, ready to fight. Zhou Xuanji was expressionless as he thought to himself, This guy is really here. Father, what should we do? Zhou Shaoxian asked in a low voice, looking at Zhou Tanhua anxiously. The Sword Emperor is attacking, and her brother is still receiving the inheritance. What should I do? Zhou Xuanji said softly, Don't panic. There are so many powerful experts here. What are you afraid of? Just as he spoke, the Sword Emperor raised his hand, and a black sword of light appeared in his hand. Boom! Li Xianhuang burst out with an extraordinary aura. His whole body was burning with yellow flames as he slowly flew up. The handsome monk also flew up, A faint golden light radiated from the surface of his body. His eyes were filled with a silver light, covering his pupils. The other Sovereign Range Masters also entered a state of battle. Their murderous aura soared into the sky. Chapter 838. The atmosphere in the Meridian Gathering Tower was tense. Other than Zhou Xuanji, all living beings were anxious and looked at the Sword Emperor in shock. This was Anti-Kunlun's supreme being, and his strength had long been proven. Even though all of the range masters were gathered here, it still made them feel uneasy. The Sword Emperor looked disdainfully at Li Xianhuang and said with a smile, "In our Kunlun origin court, you died at my hands. Do you want to know how you died?" Li Xianhuang frowned, but he didn't stop. He had just become a heavenly king of the origin court. So how could he be timid in front of the Sword Emperor? Even if he was not confident, he still wanted to fight. He asked in a low voice, "Arcane dragon painting, are you ready?" The handsome monk smiled and said, "It is my honor to fight and die together with you." As soon as he finished speaking, the two of them turned into two streaks of light and soared into the sky. Boom! The two of them collided with the Sword Emperor, but they were blocked by a layer of formless sword energy, unable to touch the Sword Emperor. "You overestimate yourself." The Sword Emperor laughed in disdain. Sword Chi burst forth from his body and sent the two of them flying. The various bloodline masters slapped their chairs and rushed towards the Sword Arch. Super Divine ranges and Sovereign Divine ranges attacked as well. Zhou Xuanji was still sitting on his throne without moving. The Sword Emperor didn't suppress all the experts directly. Instead, he smiled and looked at the various divine abilities. Zhou Xuanji turned his gaze to Zhou Tanhua and asked in his heart, "Can I use a divine ability to move him away without interrupting the inheritance process?" If one was forcefully interrupted in the midst of enlightenment, it would be very easy for one to go berserk. Of course, don't forget your soul source orb. Absorb him directly into it. Little Sovereign replied, making Zhou Xuanji raise his brow. The soul source orb also had such an effect. Generally speaking, all creatures absorbed by the soul source orb would fall into a deep sleep, except for the Holy Ghost. The soul source orb represents death, and the all lives brush represents life. With the two combined, you can live or die depending on your thoughts. In his opinion, Zhou Xuanji had underestimated the power of the All Lives pen and the Soul Source Orb. Zhou Xuanji immediately got up. The space between his eyebrows split open as the Soul Source Orb suddenly appeared and directly sucked Zhou Tanhua into it. He looked at Zhou Shaoxian and transmitted his voice, "Stay close to me and be ready to retreat." Zhou Shaoxian nodded and walked to him obediently. At the same time, the battle above continued. After seeing Zhou Tanhua being taken into the Soul Source Orb, the Sword Emperor showed a contemptuous smile and said, "Is that all you have?" Rumble, the thunder clouds scattered, and light swords appeared in the sky. The tips of the swords pointed downwards, covering the entire sky. The distance between the swords was no more than 5 feet. As far as the eye could see, it was estimated that there were over 100 billion of them, and every single one of them exuded an extremely strong sense of oppression. As the pressure converged, the Meridian Convergence Pagoda shook violently, and the pagoda below began to snap. All living beings flew up to avoid falling. Zhou Xuanji flew far away with Zhou Shaoxian, distancing himself from the battlefield. "Primordial Chaos Sword Shadow," Zhou Shaoxian said excitedly. In the past, she liked the Primordial Chaos Sword Shadow the most, but as her cultivation increased, she no longer liked this kind of gaudy divine ability. However, when she saw the Sword Emperor's Primordial Chaos Sword Shadow, she was once again astonished. Too domineering. Zhou Xuanji narrowed his eyes. He could also sense the horrifying might of the Primordial Chaos Sword Shadow above him. Truly powerful. It was so strong that it made him feel powerless. He felt that even if he was 10,000 times stronger, he would still be far from this level. All the powerful cultivators were shocked. They all distanced themselves from the Sword Emperor and looked up at the sky in horror. This, Namu Tiani's scalp turned numb, and his voice trembled as he spoke. The other sovereign range lords were the same. Shu Longhua furrowed his brows and raised his arms suddenly. Numerous golden halos flew out from his body and grew rapidly, forming a layer of golden ocean under the primordial chaos sword shadow. The golden ocean covered the sky and tried to block all the primordial chaos sword shadows. Just you? The Sword Emperor waved his right hand, and billions of light swords descended suddenly, as though the world was collapsing. The golden ocean disintegrated immediately. Shu Longhua vomited blood and almost fell down. Fortunately, Li Xianwang caught him in time. Billions of light swords rained down like a storm. All the powerful cultivators used their divine abilities to block them. Zhou Xuanji teleported away with Zhou Shaoxian and quickly flew out of the Sovereign Emperor Divine range. Not only them, but many other living beings also chose to flee. Just when they flew out, the Sovereign Emperor Divine range exploded. Boom! The violent impact sent all the escaping living beings flying. Zhou Xuanji relied on the inverse chaos divine ability to escape. He looked back and saw the Sovereign Emperor Divine range bursting out with countless sword chi, wreaking havoc in the Kunlun universe. The surrounding divine ranges shook along with it. A powerful aura enveloped most of the Kunlun origin court. Everyone was in an uproar. Zhou Xuanji's expression changed. Zhou Shaoxian, who was beside him, was even more dumbfounded. It was the first time she had seen the Sword Emperor in action. Too powerful. He was not on the same level as everyone else. Such an enemy really made people feel despair. Father, Zhou Shaoxian mumbled to herself. Her voice was filled with fear as she subconsciously moved closer to Zhou Xuanji. Zhou Xuanji tried his best to remain calm. He knew that the Sword Emperor was powerful, but he did not expect him to be this powerful. Almost all the living beings in the Sovereign Emperor Divine range had died, and it was just a divine ability. The Sovereign Emperor Divine range had gathered the top fighting power of the entire Kunlun origin court, but they were all wiped out by the Sword Emperor just like that. Submit to me and prosper, or oppose me and die. If your anti-Kunlun dares to play any more tricks, I will really flatten you and destroy everything. The Sword Emperor's rampant laughter resounded through the entire Kunlun origin court, making countless living beings shudder. At the same time, the scene of the battle just now appeared in the minds of all living beings. This was the Sword Emperor's doing. He deliberately increased the fear and despair in the hearts of all living beings. He wanted all living beings to not dare to resist him anymore. Zhou Xuanji said nothing and flew back to the Emperor's Sword Divine range with Zhou Shaoxian. After witnessing this battle, he was even more eager to fuse the Soul Source Orb and the All Lives Pen, and then devour the Soul Source Pool to make himself as strong as possible. Zhou Shaoxian, who had always been talkative, also fell into silence. She had yet to recover from the shock and fear just now. A moment ago, the range masters were still fighting for the position of Origin Court Heavenly King. But now, those arrogant range masters had all been turned into ashes. It made her feel surreal. They flew forward at full speed. Suddenly, they disappeared into the starry sky. When the two opened their eyes, they had already arrived in a crimson space. A figure was floating in front of them. It was Sovereign Hongshan. This time, Sovereign Hongshan looked at them with his true appearance. So beautiful. Zhou Xiaoshuan's eyes widened as she murmured. Sovereign Hongshan's expression was cold and elegant. Staring at Zhou Xuanji, she said, "You see, the current Kunlun origin court is just a dish that the Sword Emperor can eat at any time." Zhou Xuanji sighed and said, "You don't need to tell me, I know. But it's useless to look for me now. If you want to look for someone, you should look for the Sovereign." Sovereign Hongshan stared at him and said meaningfully, "Don't you know? The Sovereign is you, whether in the past, present, or future." Chapter 839. I'm the Supreme Martial Artist? Zhou Xuanji asked in astonishment, frowning. How could he be a Supreme Martial Artist? If he was, Why didn't the Sword Emperor know about it? Zhou Shaoxian was shocked and couldn't help but look at her father again. It's you, but you haven't realized it yet. The Kunlun origin court and the anti-Kunlun have many similarities, but there are also many differences. This is the biggest difference between you and the Sword Emperor. I had my suspicions before, but you didn't have the aura of a paragon on you. It was only when the paragons chose your son that I realized what was going on. If you were Jizun, who would you choose to be your successor? Zhou Xuanji's frown deepened. If he was the sovereign, he would definitely choose his son to inherit. After all, a son would inherit his father's legacy. However, just based on this point, how could he make such an assertion? Wait a minute. Could it be? Zhou Xuanji thought of this, and his pupils contracted. His forehead was covered in cold sweat. He was completely enlightened. Supreme Legendary Sword System. Supremacy. It was formed by Jizun. It was no wonder that even the powerful Sword Emperor and Mortal Supremacy couldn't find a reincarnation of a supremacy. The more Zhou Xuanji thought about it, the more shocked he was. He asked in his heart, Sword Spirit, could the system be the reincarnation of the sovereign? The Sword Spirit quickly replied, the Sword Spirit also doesn't know the origins of the supreme legendary sword system. I only know that I want to serve the Sword Master and help the Sword Master become stronger without end. Its voice was as emotionless as before, just like any other artifact spirit. Zhou Xuanji frowned and fell in a deep thought. If the supreme legendary sword system was formed by Jizun, then he had to be on guard. What if the supreme martial artist was plotting something? As long as you activate your supreme power, you'll be able to contend against the Sword Emperor. I will do my best to help you. Hongchun's sovereign's voice came, interrupting Zhou Xuanji's thoughts. Zhou Xuanji said helplessly, don't put your hopes on me. If I could do it, would the Sword Emperor be so arrogant? He understood the supreme legendary sword system very well. It was impossible for it to explode with power that exceeded its current level. If he could refresh the number of times he could use the wish-fulfilling sword, that would be great. Unfortunately, there was no other way. Autar Crimson Dust waved his hand. I have my ways. Seeing how determined she was, Zhou Xuanji felt even more helpless. He glanced at Zhou Shaoxian and kept her in the Tianxia map. Then, he flew in front of Supreme Hongchun. He said seriously, I am definitely not the reincarnation of a supreme being, but I might have a supreme being's manifestation treasure, but I am temporarily unable to use this power. Not to mention that the truth of this matter still needs to be verified. Supreme Hongchun frowned when she heard this. She couldn't help but waver. Could she have guessed wrongly? If this possibility was wrong, then how should she find a way to defeat the Sword Emperor? The Sword Sovereign told me that the Supreme Being has already reincarnated, and his fate is connected to mine. Perhaps it's someone I know, but this range is too large. Why don't you think of a way to let the Supreme Being of Darkness in advance? Zhou Xuanji said, shaking his head. The Sword Emperor hoped that Zhou Xuanji could help him fight against the Sovereign and Dark Sovereign. Now, Supremacy Crimson Dust wanted him to use his Supremacy's power to resist the Sword Emperor. He was stuck in the middle, feeling very aggrieved. He was clearly not strong enough, but he still wanted to place the fate of the Kunlun origin cord on his shoulders. Supremacy Crimson Dust let out a long sigh and said, well, even if you are really the sovereign, it will take time for you to recover your cultivation. By the way, you have to be careful. If I can make such a guess, the Sword Emperor and the Dark Sovereign can too. Once the Dark Sovereign comes, no matter who wins or loses, you may be targeted by them. The current Kunlun origin court no longer has the power to resist any of them. Zhou Xuanji nodded. The incident at the Pulse Gathering Tower made him very uneasy. The current Kunlun origin court could be said to be crippled. If the sovereign didn't appear, the Sword Emperor's plan might succeed in advance. The two no longer said anything. Supremacy Crimson Dust sent Zhou Xuanji out of the mortal plane. Only Supremacy Crimson Dust was left in this crimson space. Her eyes flickered as she murmured, if you aren't the sovereign, then who is qualified? No one answered her. She thought about it alone. Maybe it's a good thing. The corner of supremacy crimson dust's mouth rose. The smile on her beautiful and cold face looked so sinister. After returning to the Emperor's Sword Divine range, Zhou Xuanji released Zhou Tanhua and Zhou Shaoxian. Zhou Tanhua was still receiving the inheritance, causing the others to worry. Fortunately, Zhou Xuanji and Zhou Shaoxian explained the situation. After learning that Zhou Tanhua had received the sovereign's inheritance, everyone was very excited. Doesn't this mean that Zhou Tanhua's future fortune won't be any weaker than Zhou Xuanji's? The sovereign's inheritance, no matter how weak it is, should be able to make him reach the level of supremacy crimson dust. You take care of him, I'm going to cultivate, Zhou Xuanji said to Jiang Shui. Zhou Xuanji said to Jiang Shui before entering the cultivation palace. He took out the lesser supreme sword and sat down cross-legged, continuing to fuse the soul source orb and the all-lives brush. Little sovereign flew out, rubbing his chin as he murmured, "Could it be that the light that took me away was the power of the current sovereign?" Zhou Xuanji closed his eyes and replied, "It should be. You are also weak enough to fall in the hands of the younger generation." Little sovereign's eyes widened as he angrily snorted, "No way. When I returned to the Kunlun Origin Court, only my soul was left. How could he lose to the younger generation?" Zhou Xuanji smiled but didn't answer. His heart was shrouded in a dark cloud. If the sovereign really became the supreme legendary sword system, how would he face the system? In any case, the top priority was to refine the soul source orb and the all-lives brush. He stopped thinking about it and focused all his attention. A month later, Zhou Tanhua's inheritance was successful and he woke up. After he woke up, he immediately went into seclusion. No one disturbed him. Everyone was looking forward to him becoming stronger. Zhou Xuanji didn't look for him either. He was still busy fusing the soul source orb and the all-lives brush. About 2 years passed. Zhou Xuanji finally fused the soul source orb and the all-lives brush together. Boom! The cultivation palace shook slightly as Zhou Xuanji suddenly opened his eyes. The soul source orb flew out from between his eyebrows, followed by the all-lives brush. The gap between his eyebrows also recovered. He fixed his eyes on it and saw a bright light ahead. In the light, he could vaguely see the soul source orb and the all-lives brush intertwined. With a thought, the two treasures began to transform. The artifact he wanted was naturally in the shape of a sword. Its level might surpass Rong Wansheng and touch the floor of the Origin Court, overturning. You finally reached this step. A voice rang in Zhou Xuanji's ears. Immediately afterward, the lesser supreme sword was absorbed into his body. Zhou Xuanji's eyes widened. Just as he was about to speak, a humanoid figure appeared in front of him. Zhou Xuanji took a deep breath and asked in a deep voice, "Are you the sovereign?" Controlling the lesser supreme sword to return to the supreme warehouse. Apart from the sword spirit in him, who else could do it? Or the system itself? "Yes, I am the current sovereign. You can call me Wu Zhou," the light figure replied with a smile. His voice didn't sound dignified at all. On the contrary, it sounded very kind. Zhou Xuanji asked, "Why did you reincarnate?" At this moment, his heart was in chaos. Chapter 840. You don't have to be nervous. I mean you no harm. Since you have already fused the soul source orb and the all-lives brush, I will tell you everything, Wu Zhou, who had turned into a shadow, said with a smile. Wu Zhou, who had turned into a silhouette of light, laughed. His tone made Zhou Xuanji a little dazed. He inexplicably thought of the old immortal. I have never stopped cultivating since I became the sovereign. I always felt that the end of cultivation should not end here. Otherwise, the sages would not have created unknown domains one after another. Wu Zhou didn't wait for Zhou Xuanji to speak and started talking. The serendipity of world in your body is actually my serendipity. I once relied on it to rise to the sovereign's position, but in the end, I couldn't figure out its origin. When I decided to wander outside the court, I erased my mark on this serendipity and sent it into the mortal world. Now I'm just a wisp of consciousness. I will tell you everything. The serendipity of world is the most mysterious existence in the Kunlun origin court. It is omnipotent. It will transform into different auxiliary systems according to different masters. Your sword Dao is destined. TSK, TSK. I really look forward to your future achievements. Hearing this, Zhou Xuanji felt relieved. It turned out that the supreme legendary sword system wasn't transformed by the sovereign. The sovereign was just the previous owner of the system. He asked doubtfully, I know that your reign is far shorter than the previous sovereigns. Why are you in such a hurry to leave? If Wu Zhou didn't leave, he wouldn't be here today. This was karma. Because I found that most of the previous sovereigns didn't fall. They might be trapped in another place. I want to save them and see if the sages have opened up new domains. As for why I left so early, it's because I'm too invincible. I once released the Dark Sovereign. Unfortunately, he was too weak and wasn't my opponent at all. Later, he sent his son to get close to me. I deliberately followed him and then created the illusion that I was stubborn to lure the Dark Sovereign back. After Wu Zhou finished speaking, he burst into laughter as if he was mocking the Dark Sovereign's stupidity. Zhou Xuanji was stunned. So all of this was Sovereign Wu Zhou's plan? Why did he do this? Now that the Kunlun origin court was almost destroyed, if what Wu Zhou said was true, then he was the culprit. He could easily defeat the Darkness Sovereign. So how could the Sword Emperor be his match? Seeing Zhou Xuanji frown, Wu Zhou smiled and said, Don't worry, the current situation is nothing. I'm doing this because I want to choose a new sovereign as soon as possible. Otherwise, I will have to wait for hundreds of millions of years, or even tens of billions of years before I can leave. Having heard this, Zhou Xuanji frowned even more tightly. Just because of boredom, the Kunlun origin court ended up in such a state. Look at how furrowed your brows are. I already know what's going on outside. Just wait and see. Whether it's the Darkness Sovereign or you making a comeback, they're all just clowns. Your future achievements will surpass yours. You have the primordial destiny, but he doesn't. Wu Zhou continued. He spoke with incomparable confidence, completely disregarding the Sword Emperor and the Darkness Sovereign. Zhou Xuanji could not help but cry out. But what about those dead creatures? Almost all of the Kunlun origin court's range masters are dead. This guy must be crazy. So what? It's not like all the divine ranges have been destroyed. It's a good time to have a new range master. Wu Zhou said indifferently, which made Zhou Xuanji even angrier. Before Zhou Xuanji could lose his temper, Wu Zhou continued, You have already fused with the Soul Source Orb. The All Lives Brush, the primordial destiny, will belong to you completely. You can give a new name. Primordial destiny is just a domain that I once encountered. It was opened up by a sovereign. It's very beautiful. Okay, this strand of my will is about to dissipate. It won't be long before my true body arrives. At that time, I will return peace to the Kunlun origin court. But after sweeping them away, I will leave again. Whether you can become the sovereign or not depends on your own efforts. After speaking, Wu Zhou disappeared in front of Zhou Xuanji. The cultivation palace fell into silence. Zhou Xuanji was still deep in thought. It turned out that the sovereign didn't reincarnate. He just left his true inheritance to him. Since that's the case, it's up to you. Zhou Xuanji breathed a sigh of relief as he looked ahead. The Soul Source Orb and the All Lives Brush had already fused together. A sword as wide as a palm appeared in the ball of light. The hilt and the guard of the sword seemed to have a dragon wrapped around it, twisting slightly in the light. From today onwards, you will be called the Life and Death Emperor's Sword. Zhou Xuanji muttered to himself with a smile. Zhou Xuanji smiled as he muttered to himself. Even before he held this sword in his hand, he could already feel how powerful it was. After all, the Soul Source Orb and All Lives Brush had already recognized him as their master. Naturally, the new sword that had been fused also recognized him as its master. He raised his right hand. As the light dissipated, the Emperor's sword of life and death fell into his hand. The blade of this sword was white on one side and black on the other. The middle part was like a willow leaf. It had beautiful lines, and the guard of the sword, which was connected to the hilt and the blade, was a dragon head with 2 dragon claws. It was lifelike, mighty and domineering. Holding this sword, he felt high-spirited. This sword contained infinite power. It was stronger than any previous sword. No, there was also the wish-fulfilling sword. It was unfathomable, the sword of life and death. It contained all the abilities of the soul source orb and the all lives brush. Its power of life and death had undergone a metamorphic upgrade. He immediately prepared to put the Emperor's Sword of Life and Death into the Supreme Storage. But he found that he couldn't put it in. The Emperor's Sword of Life and Death was resisting the Supreme Storage. The Supreme Storage was also resisting the Emperor's Sword of Life and Death. Zhou Xuanji raised his brow and mumbled to himself with a smile. Interesting. He let go of the Emperor's Sword of Life and Death and let it follow him. He stepped out of the cultivation palace, ready to visit Zhou Tianhua. Wu Zhou had already said that he would come back. Naturally, the pressure on him had been reduced sharply. At this moment, Zhou Tianhua was cultivating on the edge of a large lake, leaning against a mountain. He was holding a long sword glowing with blue light in his hand. He stood motionless like a wooden stake, quietly contemplating. Zhou Xuanji appeared beside him, but he didn't even notice it. This kid has already condensed 5 Dao flowers. It seems that the sovereign's inheritance is really amazing. Zhou Xuanji smiled with satisfaction. But just as he was about to leave, Zhou Tianhua suddenly opened his eyes. "Father!" He opened his eyes and called out with excitement on his face. He took a step forward and said excitedly, "Father, I have already obtained the cultivation method of the sovereign. I will tell you first. You can teach me after you have cultivated it. How about it?" Zhou Xuanji shook his head and couldn't help but laugh. He said, "Silly child, this is your opportunity. You don't have to tell me everything. It will be the same in the future. You must keep a trump card for yourself." Zhou Tianhua could only nod. His heart was filled with gratitude. To have such a considerate father, it was indeed his good fortune in 3 lifetimes. Zhou Xuanji asked, "Is there anything wrong with your eyes recently?" Last time, the Sword Emperor had manipulated Zhou Tianhua and made him lose his mind. Zhou Xuanji still remembered it clearly. "No, after obtaining the sovereign's inheritance, I have already eliminated the darkness in my eyes. The Sword Emperor can forget about harming me again. In addition, I have also received the sovereign's instructions. He will be back soon," Zhou Tianhua said with a smile. Zhou Tianhua smiled. His eyes flickered with confidence. Chapter 841. "Oh, what else did Ji Zun tell you?" Zhou Xuanji asked out of curiosity. Wu Zhou's divine ability was truly incredible to be able to leave behind so much scattered will. He didn't completely trust Wu Zhou. This guy was a supreme. He didn't care about the life and death of the Kunlun origin core at all. All living beings were not as important as his loneliness. Such a person was completely self-centered. Who knew when he would deal with his inheritors? He told me to cultivate hard and strive to become the origin court war god. He told me to join forces with you and your son to lead the Kunlun origin court to an unprecedented prosperity. He looked at Zhou Xuanji with eyes full of worship. Even though he had received the sovereign's inheritance, the sovereign still believed that Zhou Xuanji could become the sovereign. What kind of talent and power did he need? Zhou Xuanji frowned slightly, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. Killing a person's heart. These words seemed to be a matchmaker, and they had good intentions. However, when placed in the position of a supreme being, they definitely harbored malicious intentions. Many people fought for the position of range master until their families were ruined, not to mention the position of supremacy. If it weren't for the close relationship between Zhou Xuanji and Zhou Tianhua, and a lack of estrangement between the father and son, Wu Zhou's words might have caused the father and son to kill each other. Seeing him frown, Zhou Tianhua instantly understood what he meant. "Father, don't worry. I won't let my imagination run wild, and I won't develop absolute worship and trust toward Ji Zun. Just like what you taught me, we can only trust ourselves the most." Hearing this, Zhou Xuanji couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. He stared at his son and examined him. "Your sword Dao has matured quite a bit. Do you want to learn a new Sword Dao Divine Art? Upon hearing this, Zhou Tanhua's eyes lit up, and he quickly nodded. As such, Zhou Xuanji taught him the ultimate Chaos Dao. The interior of the Emperor's Sword Divine range was harmonious, and all the disciples were actively cultivating. However, outside the Emperor's Sword Divine range, it was hell on earth. Following the destruction of the majority of the range masters and the venerable Emperor Divine range, the various divine ranges were in complete chaos. Without the suppression of the branch master and facing death, the darkness in everyone's hearts was awakened. Since they were going to die anyway, they began to do things that they normally wouldn't dare to do. For a time, the entire Kunlun Origin Court was in chaos. The Sword Emperor was still forcing the divine ranges to hand over the 15-star geniuses or inheritors of the Origin of Laws. The Kunlun Origin Court was facing an unprecedented dark period. At the end of the Void Realm, in the endless darkness, hundreds of powerful figures stood there. Paragon Crimson Dust, the apex of Wheel, the 12 forefathers of Law, and the others all had very serious expressions on their faces. Luan Feng was still holding the Origin Court War God in his right hand. This guy was actually not dead yet, but he was now like a cripple. His body was tied up by the silver light chains, unable to move. Begin. After he finished speaking, he waved his right hand, and a silver chain wrapped around Origin Court War God directly exploded, turning into countless light stars that drifted away. Origin Court War God took a deep breath and stepped forward. Everyone stared at him, ready to attack at any time. The atmosphere was extremely oppressive. Origin Court War God took 7 steps forward. After stopping, he raised his hands, palms facing forward, and slowly closed his eyes. After a while, the darkness ahead was suffused with light, like a whirlpool on the surface of a lake. The range of spatial distortion grew larger and larger. Everyone held their breaths in rapt attention. Even Crimson Dust Supremacy narrowed his eyes as the aura of the mortal world swirled around him. Who wouldn't be nervous when facing a darkness sovereign? Father, come out! Origin Court War God shouted. His body quickly shriveled, then ignited into flames, turned into smoke, and drilled into the dark vortex ahead. Boom! A terrifying beam of light broke through the center of the black vortex, brutally tearing open the hole and gradually expanding it. An overbearing and peerless aura came in, making all the powerful experts' hair stand on end. Even someone as strong as Crimson Dust Supremacy was shocked. This, Luan Feng's scalp went numb, and his face was overflowing with cold sweat. He knew that the Darkness Sovereign was very strong, but he didn't expect him to be so strong after being sealed for such a long time. It was incredible. Boom! Another beam of light broke through the darkness, as if the dark universe ahead was about to collapse. Ha! I'm finally back. An unruly and rampant laughter resounded through the universe, his tone full of madness and violence. Darkness Sovereign. He had been sealed for too long. It had been so long that he had already gone crazy. He wanted to slaughter. He wanted to destroy. The powerful experts could feel his emotions as soon as they heard this. They took out their magic treasures and prepared to fight. Darkness Sovereign, the Kunlun Origin Court is currently being suppressed by Anti-Kunlun Supreme. If you come in, how can the Sword Emperor let you go? Luan Feng shouted. His voice was trembling. It was obvious how scared he was. Darkness Sovereign didn't answer him. More and more beams of light broke through the darkness, and the void boundary began to shake violently. Space collapsed, and space-time lightning flooded in like a group of dancing dragons. The powerful experts panicked. They looked at each other in dismay. Retreat. Crimson Dust Supremacy ordered. The powerful experts immediately felt relieved and turned to flee. Although they hadn't seen the true appearance of Darkness Sovereign, his aura was too terrifying. It made them feel like they were facing death. In the blink of an eye, all the powerful experts disappeared without a trace. More and more beams of light appeared, shattering the dark universe. Anti-Kunlun. Sword Emperor? A clown dares to disturb the Kunlun Origin Court. What a joke. Darkness Sovereign's voice resounded. His words were full of sarcasm. Emperor Sword Divine Range. On the edge of the Great Lake, Zhou Xuanji, who was teaching Zhou Tanhua cultivation, suddenly furrowed his brow. He looked up at the horizon and cast the 10,000 worlds piercer to spy on the outside world. Soon, he saw the space at the edge of the void boundary shattering. A billowing black fog was approaching the Kunlun Origin Court at an extremely fast speed. He fixed his eyes on it and saw countless evil ghosts in the black fog. They were clad in armor and riding mounts, galloping wantonly. He also saw a figure. It was towering and majestic like a shadow. He couldn't see its true appearance. Darkness Sovereign. This guy is finally here. Zhou Xuanji narrowed his eyes. He couldn't help but be curious. Between Darkness Sovereign and Sword Emperor, who is stronger? If he could notice the arrival of Darkness Sovereign, so could the Sword Emperor. Haha, Kunlun Origin Court. Your sovereign is here. That anti-Kunlun kid dares to disturb the Kunlun Origin Court. He is really overestimating himself. The Kunlun Origin Court can only be destroyed by this sovereign. Prepare to die. Darkness Sovereign's insolent laughter resounded throughout the Kunlun Origin Court. Everyone wasn't surprised. On the contrary, they were even more desperate. Whether Darkness Sovereign or Sword Emperor won, they wouldn't be able to escape death. Sword Emperor didn't respond to Darkness Sovereign. The Kunlun Origin Court once again returned to silence. Zhou Tanhua asked while practicing his sword, "Father, who do you think will win? I hope they're evenly matched." The longer the two sovereigns dragged on, the more advantageous it would be for them. Zhou Xuanji muttered, "It should be the Sword Emperor." He wasn't boasting, but the Sword Emperor had a kind of domineering aura of invincibility. Even Wu Zhou didn't have such an obvious domineering aura. However, he heard it clearly. Every sovereign thought that they were invincible and that the other sovereigns were vulnerable. Chapter 842. After the Darkness Sovereign returned, Zhou Xuanji modified the Emperor's Sword Divine Range's defensive array to strengthen its defense. He even refined the 24-rank Deep Black Lotus and built many teleportation formations inside it to supply his needs when he was escaping. He returned to the cliff in front of the training hall. He was dressed in white and stood against the wind. His purple eyes were observing the battle outside. The Emperor of Life and Death sword floated beside him. He could already see the figures of the Supreme of Darkness and the Sword Emperor fighting. The two Supremes seemed to have used some kind of divine ability, causing the battle to be confined to one side of the void, not affecting the Kunlun Origin Court or the Myriad Worlds. In fact, not even the slightest sound could be heard. Their battle silhouettes were extremely fast. Zhou Xuanji's exterminating divine eyes couldn't capture them. After watching for a while, he even felt a little dizzy. Is this the power of a supreme being? Just watching him fight is enough to make me fall head over heels for him. Zhou Xuanji mumbled to himself. His eyes were filled with fighting spirit. Sooner or later, he would reach the supreme being realm. With that thought, he disappeared on the spot. He jumped directly into the space-time turbulence and rushed towards the soul source pool. According to the situation of the battle between the Sword Emperor and the Darkness Sovereign, it would be hard to determine the victor in a short period of time. When he arrived at the soul source pool, the virtuous Great Array was not triggered. The Emperor's Sword of Life and Death glowed, protecting Zhou Xuanji's head. He quickly walked to the edge of the soul source pond, sat down cross-legged, and began to swallow the water in the soul source pond. The Lesser Supreme Sword appeared on another layer of his body, and the Lesser Supreme Sword's soul floated out. He sized up the Emperor's Sword of Life and Death and praised, "You are indeed a swordsman. This sword is incredible. It is definitely a good treasure." The veins on Zhou Xuanji's forehead bulged, but he did not speak. Little Sovereign continued to sigh. The auras of the Darkness Supreme and the Sword Emperor are really strong. Looking at the past and present, they aren't weak among the Supremes. It's a good thing that they are evenly matched. Let them continue to fight. You can take this opportunity to absorb the soul source pool. Stab your sword into the pool. The Soul Source bead and All Lives brush are supreme treasures that can help you absorb the Soul Source pool. Hearing this, Zhou Xuanji immediately put the Emperor Sword of Life and Death into the Soul Source pool. Bang! The ripples in the Soul Source pool gradually turned into raging waves. Zhou Xuanji was pleasantly surprised to find that the speed at which he absorbed the pool water had greatly increased. The efficiency was 10 times higher than before. Every 2 hours, the water level in the pond would drop by an inch. Nothing much could be seen an hour, but after a day, after a month, one could clearly see the water level of the Soul Source pond dropping. During the absorption process, Zhou Xuanji's cultivation did not increase significantly. He only felt that his soul had become heavier, and there was a strange energy circulating within his body. Soul origin. The souls of all living beings were also supported by laws. The soul origin was not artificially created. It was the original origin that existed from the very beginning. According to Little Sovereign, the origin of soul origin was unknown. Even if one became a sovereign, it would be difficult to trace its origin. 3 years later, the Soul Source pool was already halfway down. Zhou Xuanji's black hair was shining with a faint light. His whole body was wrapped in soul qi. At first glance, he looked like a twisting shadow that would dissipate at any time. Little Sovereign flew out and said with satisfaction, "Soon, I'll help you. Your body is already transformed under the quenching of the Soul Source pool's water. Fortunately, you have the invading venerable physique. If it were someone else, they wouldn't be able to absorb it so quickly. They might not even be able to bear it." After that, before Zhou Xuanji could say anything, he pressed his palm against Zhou Xuanji's back. In an instant, the pool water rose up and turned into a water dragon that entered Zhou Xuanji's body. It was as though he had been enlightened. Zhou Xuanji gritted his teeth slightly, and his face twitched. His face alternated between blue and red. Even though he was accustomed to the water in the Soul Source pond, it was still difficult for him to bear such a large amount. Amazingly, with the help of Little Sovereign, Zhou Xuanji was able to persevere even though it was uncomfortable. He immediately closed his eyes and activated the Great Li Divine Suppressor Art. Meanwhile, the first battle between the Sword Emperor and the Darkness Sovereign ended. The two of them stood facing each other, less than 1,000 feet apart. Their faces were solemn. The Sword Emperor spoke in a low voice. "What a darkness exalt! I underestimated you." Supreme Darkness's body was shrouded in a black aura. His black hair fluttered in the wind, and his face was sinister. His eyes were bloodshot, and there were streaks of lightning like blood tattoos on his cheeks. Especially between his eyebrows, there seemed to be an eye. He wore a deep purple robe and looked mighty and domineering. Facing the Sword Emperor, he didn't dare to be arrogant anymore. The Sword Emperor was truly very strong. The shock in his heart was no less than the Sword Emperor's. If we continue to fight like this, it's only a matter of time before both sides suffer heavy losses. The eyes of the Darkness Sovereign flickered. He fell into a dilemma in his heart. His goal was to destroy the Kunlun Origin Court, while the Sword Emperor's goal was to devour the Kunlun Origin Court. Both of their goals were to destroy the Kunlun Origin Court. But if he gave in, the Sword Emperor would rely on the Kunlun Origin Court to become stronger. If they fought again in the future, could he still defeat the Darkness Sovereign? Darkness Sovereign, if you and I continue to fight, we will be giving Wu Zhou a chance. Don't you know how powerful Wu Zhou is? The Sword Emperor said with a strange smile. He had never met Wu Zhou of the Kunlun Origin Court, but in the anti-Kunlun, he had taken over the position of sovereign from Wu Zhou. The Darkness Sovereign sneered. "Oh, could it be that you want to join forces with this sovereign? But how will the Kunlun Origin Court be divided? Half of the inheritors of the Origin Law?" The Sword Emperor's face instantly turned gloomy. He didn't expect that the Darkness Sovereign had already guessed his purpose. A gloomy expression flashed across his face. He then said with a smile, "By the way, what's the relationship between you and Zhou Fa? He is still with me." This fellow was truly audacious and presumptuous. He actually wants to snatch the Origin Law from me. He must be tired of living. Zhou Fa. He's just a mortal who strayed into the outer world. After receiving the sovereign's guidance, he mistakenly thought that he could become the sovereign of the Kunlun origin court. A chess piece doesn't know its fate. Ridiculous. The darkness sovereign snorted, making the Sword Emperor laugh. But the Sword Emperor's smile was very cold. He thought to himself, it seems that this kid has been kept alive for nothing. The two sovereigns fell into silence once again. They were both thinking of countermeasures to kill each other. Boom! The two attacked almost at the same time, colliding once again. A bright light burst out, filling the void universe. Phew! Zhou Xuanji took a deep breath and slowly stood up. Following his gaze, the soul source pool in front of him had already disappeared, leaving only an empty sea of clouds floating. With the help of Little Sovereign, he absorbed the remaining water of the soul source pool in less than 2 months. Zhou Xuanji seemed calm, but in fact his body was in turmoil. The violent soul origin was running around in his body. It was very difficult to suppress. Can you do it? Zhou Xuanji cursed, gritting his teeth. Little Sovereign immediately flew out from the Lesser Supreme, sword next to him. With a speechless look, he said, I have helped you so much. The rest depends on your luck. Zhou Xuanji glared at him and asked, what if I fail? The soul origin was so powerful that he felt that his body would explode at any time. If it weren't for the exalted immortal physique, he might not have been able to hold on until now. He felt that he had been cheated. Chapter 843. If you want to reap the benefits, you must bear the pain. Little Sovereign smiled proudly, as if he was taking pleasure in other people's misfortune. Zhou Xuanji was infuriated, but he tried his best to keep his expression calm. He was doing his best to suppress the source of his soul. The spiritual qi and Tao energy of this world gathered towards him, causing his robes to flutter incessantly. The power of the invading venerable body began to take effect, suppressing the soul source in his body. Xiao, the life and death Emperor's sword sped over and directly entered Zhou Xuanji's body. Bang! Zhou Xuanji's pain subsided in an instant, and the violent soul source in his body calmed down and became docile. The absolute invasion saint form began to absorb the soul source, and a steady stream of origin fusion divine energy flowed through his bones and muscles, helping him recover and even increase his cultivation. He soared into the air, crossed his legs, and cultivated in the air. After recovering, his cultivation began to soar. He sprinted toward origin fusion divine, Lord Wu Ming. About 3 days passed. A vast divine might descended, enveloping the Kunlun origin court and suppressing all worlds. At this moment, countless living beings looked up. Even the darkness sovereign and sword emperor, who were fighting, stopped and looked up in fear. This aura? How is this possible? What realm is he in? Autarch Darkness cried out involuntarily. He had already lost to Autarch Wuzhou once. He had worked hard in his cultivation, and it wasn't easy for him to catch up, but when faced with Autarch Wuzhou's aura, his heart was filled with a sense of helplessness. He couldn't accept this fact. Supreme Wuzhou had actually far surpassed him. The Sword Emperor's expression was also very ugly. Ever since he fought with Sovereign Darkness, he realized that he had underestimated the strength of the Kunlun origin court sovereigns. However, he hadn't expected Sovereign Wuzhou's strength to be so terrifying. It was so terrifying that his scalp went numb. This sovereign is the Kunlun origin court's sovereign, Wuzhou. Demons and monsters dare to disturb my origin court. Don't be afraid. I will destroy the demons and resurrect the dead. Wuzhou's voice suddenly rang out like a clap of thunder, exploding in the ears of all living beings. The supremacy had returned. Resurrecting the dead? Everyone was in an uproar, overjoyed. Zhou Xuanji also opened his eyes in shock and asked, You can revive? Little Sovereign had a complicated expression on his face as he sighed with emotion. It seems that he has reached the creation realm. He created something from nothing and was reborn from death. Creation realm? Just when Zhou Xuanji was about to ask further, thunderclouds billowed above him. His expression changed drastically as he understood that the virtuous display formation was about to be activated. He immediately teleported to the Kunlun universe and continued to suppress the soul origin in his body. The Lesser Supreme sword floated behind him. Little Supreme's sword had already shrunk into the blade, not daring to come out again. Zhou Xuanji channeled his energy while looking at the top of the Kunlun origin court. The thunderclouds churned, and one imposing figure after another stood up from the clouds. They were like towering mountains, and their auras were vast and boundless. Each figure was ridiculously tall, and it was impossible to distinguish them with the naked eye. Wise sages, the will of the past supreme beings. Zhou Xuanji even saw the figure of Little Sovereign. Among the sages, he looked very inconspicuous. Sure enough, it's Little Supreme Sovereign, he muttered with an expectant look on his face. With Wu Zhou's arrival, the calamity of the Kunlun origin court should have ended. In a situation where he was powerless, he naturally hoped that someone would resolve the crisis. Regardless of whether it was him or the Emperor's Sword Divine range, they both needed a stable environment and time to develop. Humph! Just because I'm called Little Sovereign doesn't mean that I'm weak. Little Sovereign's voice resounded in his mind. He sounded extremely dissatisfied, as if he had been humiliated. The sage manifestation Great Array was set up. Every creature in the entire Kunlun origin court, no matter where they were, could see the majesty of the sage manifestation Great Array. Even within the divine range, such a spectacular scene appeared in the sky. Emperor's Sword Divine range. Zhou Tanhua was sitting by the lake, looking at the figures of the sages in the sky with a look of longing on his face. So domineering. At this moment, he suddenly felt a desire for the sovereign's position for the first time. However, this desire wasn't strong because he knew that he still had a long way to go. The first thing he had to do was to cultivate hard and help his father become the sovereign. He was very clear about one thing. With his father's character, it wouldn't take long for him to leave after becoming the sovereign. Just like Sovereign Wu Zhou, or even faster than Sovereign Wu Zhou. Zhou Xuanji had proven this many times in the first half of his life. All the disciples of the Emperor's Sword Divine range were looking up at the sky. At the top of the Kunlun origin court, above the figures of the sages, a halo appeared as a figure in a blue robe with a phoenix pattern descended. His silver hair swayed like raging flames. His face was majestic, and his eyes had multiple pupils. They were bottomless, as if they contained the entire universe. Sovereign Wu Zhou, the entire sky was under his feet. He was the supreme sovereign, looking down on all living beings. His divine might was vast and mighty. The corner of his mouth rose. His smile was so conceited and contemptuous. Two reptiles dared to disturb this sovereign's palace. Next, this sovereign will let you feel despair, Sovereign Wu Zhou said to himself with a smile. Autarch Wu Zhou chuckled to himself. He lifted his right hand, then gently waved it downwards. All the figures of the sages raised their right hands high above their heads. At the same time, the Sword Emperor and the Darkness Sovereign felt their blood run cold. What should we do? Join hands or run? Sovereign Darkness asked in a deep voice. His eyes were already filled with the intention to retreat. He had already suffered a crushing defeat. He didn't want to be defeated by Sovereign Wu Zhou again. The Sword Emperor snorted. Naturally, we will join hands and fight. Boom! Sword radiance burst out from his body like a peerless sword being unsheathed. Sovereign Darkness nodded. The two sovereigns disappeared at the same time. In the starry sky, Zhou Xuanji was meditating, cultivating while admiring the might of the sage display formation. At this moment, he suddenly began to break through. He had absorbed the soul source. Although it hadn't completely fused with his saint form of absolute infiltration, it was enough for him to break through to Origin Fusion Divine, Lord Level 5. With the saint form of absolute infiltration, he wasn't afraid of the heavenly tribulation. Suddenly, he narrowed his eyes. Following his gaze, he saw two meteors flashing past, rushing toward the sage display formation at the top of the origin court. One was black and the other was silver. Sovereign Darkness and Sword Emperor. The aura of the two sovereigns was very powerful, but it was completely covered by the sage display formation. Under Zhou Xuanji's gaze, the two meteors broke through the sea of clouds and destroyed several figures of the sages. Next, a powerful light burst out and swept across the Kunlun origin court, forcing Zhou Xuanji to close his eyes. "Umph! You overestimate yourself." Sovereign Wu Zhou's cold snort resounded like a great bell, resounding in Zhou Xuanji's ears. Zhou Xuanji's Dao heart trembled. Zhou Xuanji wanted to open his eyes, but the scorching light forced him to close them instinctively. He was an Origin Fusion Divine Lord. What kind of light forced him to close his eyes? After a long while, Zhou Xuanji successfully broke through to Origin Fusion Divine Lord Level 5. His Origin Fusion Divine energy skyrocketed, and the speed at which the soul source in his body fused with his muscles and bones increased tremendously. His cultivation was still growing. Suddenly, he felt that the light had weakened enough for him to open his eyes. After he opened his eyes, the scene before him made him open his eyes wide. His pupils dilated. This, Zhou Xuanji was dumbfounded. He couldn't believe his eyes. Chapter 844. In front of Zhou Xuanji, countless figures of light floated in the vast starry sky. Within the light were countless creatures, and their souls were starting to form fleshly bodies. Revive. The dead were really being resurrected. Zhou Xuanji looked around and caught sight of Nan Mitiani, B-Sovereign, Li Xianhuang, Wang Buao, and the others. It was a dazzling sight, and his soul covered the entire starry sky. Exactly what kind of cultivation would be able to achieve such enormous power? Zhou Xuanji looked up and saw that the magnificent figure of the divine display formation had disappeared above the sea of clouds. Supreme Wu Zhou, the Sword Emperor, and Supreme Darkness were nowhere to be seen. As expected of the creation realm, this junior is amazing. His voice rang in Zhou Xuanji's ear. Even if he didn't see Sovereign Wu Zhou, he didn't dare to show himself. Zhou Xuanji snorted in his heart. Impressive indeed. You're both sovereigns, but why is the gap between you two so big? Little Sovereign was silent, obviously agitated. Zhou Xuanji did not leave, but continued to cultivate, feeling Sovereign Wu Zhou's mighty power. Soon, his cultivation level stabilized at the Origin Fusion Divine Lord 5th Enlightened stage and continued to grow. The souls floating in the sky gradually regained their vitality. Whenever a soul was about to condense into a physical body, they would suddenly fly in different directions and disappear into the end of the universe. Zhou Xuanji was confused, but did not think too much about it. Most likely, Autarch Wu Zhou wanted them to return to where they had died. Otherwise, he could directly send them back to their respective god ranges. With Paragon Wu Zhou's abilities, he could see through the origins and pasts of all living beings with a single glance. The Supreme Being realm is really something to look forward to. Zhou Xuanji mumbled to himself. He had no idea how far away he was from the Sovereign after absorbing the Soul Source. However, according to his previous understanding, there seemed to be some external conditions to become a supremacy. The power of a Supreme Being, perhaps it was like the power of the God of War, it existed on its own. While he was lost in thought, the people of the Kunlun Origin Court cheered. Those destroyed divine ranges were being rebuilt at a speed visible to the naked eye. Countless living beings unconsciously flew back to their original divine ranges. Densely packed living beings and souls appeared around the Emperor's Sword Divine Range. They were all Divine Range living beings from the Emperor's Sword Divine Range. When they woke up, they all hugged each other and cried in joy. Then, they wanted to return to the God Range, but the God Range had already changed owners. They couldn't even break through the pulse protecting array. Damn it, who is it that is occupying our home? We must rush in. Ji Zun has already returned. He will make the decision for us. Let's investigate which bastard did it first. There aren't many living beings in the God range, but why is there such a powerful formation? They were extremely sullen as they looked at the majestic Emperor Sword Divine range. No matter how angry they were, they could not rush in. Inside the Emperor's Sword Divine range, all the higher-ups gathered together to discuss this matter. Xian Doya smiled and said, "Young master has obtained the inheritance of the sovereign. Even if this matter was brought to the sovereign, it would be useless. Just ignore them." Everyone nodded. It wasn't easy for them to obtain a place to stay, so how could they give it up? Ren Niming asked curiously, "Why hasn't master returned yet?" Zhou Xuanji had been gone for many years, and after causing such a ruckus, he should have returned by now. "Don't worry, you'll be fine. I have already divined his aura. He is in the Kunlun origin court, and he is still growing stronger," Daoya old man said with a smile. His divination ability was far inferior to Ren Niming's, but his fate was connected to Zhou Xuanji's, and he had changed Zhou Xuanji's fate. He could calculate Zhou Xuanji's aura more accurately than Ren Niming. But that was all. If he wanted to divine Zhou Xuanji's future, he would only suffer a backlash. Zhou Xiaoshuan's eyes lit up as she said, "Father is going to grow stronger again." Everyone became excited when they heard this. They had absolute trust in Zhou Xuanji. How much stronger would he become this time? While the Kunlun origin court was cheering for Sovereign Wu Zhou, Zhou Xuanji was still trying to fuse with the soul origin. At this moment, he had entered a state of epiphany. He could really feel the existence of the soul origin coiling around his soul. Soul origin, controlling the souls of all living beings. At this moment, his fate began to transform. Rumble, Zhou Xuanji, who was meditating, began to tremble violently. More accurately, the surrounding space was trembling. Even the space of the Kunlun universe could not withstand his aura. A silhouette appeared in front of him, less than 100 meters away. It was Sovereign Wu Zhou. He sized up Zhou Xuanji and looked surprised. "Exalted invasion, Saint Physique," he mumbled. "This brat absorbed the soul source completely. Is he going to become the soul sovereign?" A smile appeared on his face. It was a meaningful smile. Zhou Xuanji did not know that Sovereign Wu Zhou had arrived. He was in a very mysterious state. Countless soul memories flowed into his mind, making him feel as though he was dreaming of Zhou Xuanji. Fortunately, he had a strong will and did not lose himself. His cultivation continued to soar. In less than 5 days, he forcefully broke through to Origin Fusion Divine Lord Level 6 comprehensions. His black hair turned into thousands of silver strands that danced in the wind. A silver rune appeared on his forehead. It was the shape of the Emperor's sword of life and death. Above him, billowing thunderclouds gathered. Countless illusory figures flew from all directions of the Kunlun origin court like celestial beings. It was too much for the eyes to take in. Soul power. Fate of everyone. Billions of souls flew into the sky and became the soul sovereign. Zhou Xuanji looked up suddenly. His eyes were filled with a dazzling purple radiance. He could no longer control himself and let out a loud roar. Break. His roar resounded across the entire Kunlun origin court. Countless living beings looked up in shock. Within the Sovereign Emperor Divine range, in a Meridian Gathering Tower, all the range lords had woken up. They were talking to each other when they were shocked by Zhou Xuanji's roar. "This is Zhou Xuanji." Namatiani opened his eyes wide in astonishment. The other range lords were stunned too. Zhou Xuanji? Why wasn't he here? Billions of souls flew into the thundercloud vortex and gathered into a gigantic ball of light. A powerful beam of light shot down and shone on Zhou Xuanji. Within the light, Zhou Xuanji stood up slowly. He looked down at his own body and murmured, "What a powerful strength." His body was radiating a silver radiance like a god. His body was filled with explosive power. This was the first time he had felt such a powerful and invincible feeling. He suddenly caught a glimpse of Sovereign Wu Zhou's figure. He couldn't help but be stunned. Sovereign Wu Zhou smiled at him, and said, "You are becoming the sole sovereign. Make a good breakthrough. This is a very rare opportunity. When you succeed, this sovereign will give you a big gift." Sole sovereign? Zhou Xuanji narrowed his eyes. He didn't answer, but focused on fusing with the soul source power in his body. His extermination body was transforming. This feeling was very wonderful. He couldn't explain it clearly. Only he could feel it. The soul sovereign belongs to the extreme of the source laws, just like the mortal sovereign. However, there's an insurmountable gap between it and the true great sovereign. To become a great sovereign like me and Wu Zhou, you need to master the source laws of the entire Kunlun origin court to reach a perfect state. Little sovereign's voice resounded, introducing Zhou Xuanji to the soul sovereign. Chapter 845. Soul Sovereign. Great Sovereign. Zhou Xuanji memorized these two names. His goal was naturally Great Sovereign. He continued to break through. Under the gaze of Sovereign Wu Zhou, it didn't take long for him to break through to the Origin Fusion Divine, Lord Seven Comprehensions. The beam of light descending from the sea of clouds had yet to dissipate. The soul origin was passing on to Zhou Xuanji, crowning him and helping him become the soul sovereign. The Kunlun origin court's fate was surging. When everyone's fate recognized Zhou Xuanji as the soul sovereign, he was the soul sovereign and had mastered the soul rules. Sovereign Wu Zhou nodded slightly and said, "When you become the soul sovereign, come to the peak of the origin court. This sovereign has prepared a big gift for you." Having said this, he disappeared into thin air. Zhou Xuanji didn't open his eyes. He was immersed in the soul origin. On the same day, he successfully broke through to the Origin Fusion Divine, Lord Seven Comprehensions. The speed at which his cultivation soared slowed down. He had completely integrated the soul origin and become the soul sovereign. The soul sovereign controlled the soul. He could see the soul world when he opened his eyes. In this world, the creatures in the Kunlun origin court were only in soul form. And those lonely souls and wild ghosts floating in the Kunlun universe were like Tao energy in his eyes. He could easily control them. This feeling was extremely wonderful. He felt like he was in control of everything. This was the sovereign, the only one. As the beam of light dissipated, his fluttering robe and silver hair fell to the ground. The light in his eyes began to converge, returning to his purple eyes. Compared to before, he had a more sacred temperament. But now, he really looked like a sovereign, just like Sovereign Wu Zhou, the Sword Emperor, and Sovereign Hong Chun. They had a kind of domineering aura. Perhaps it was the domineering aura exclusive to sovereigns. Such a powerful feeling. This is just the soul sovereign. If I become the great sovereign, Zhou Xuanji looked at his hands and mumbled to himself with a fascinated look on his face. The life and death emperor sword emerged from his back and circled around him. He smiled and suddenly flew up, breaking through the sea of clouds and flying toward the peak of the origin court. He didn't know where Sovereign Wu Zhou was. But as soon as he arrived at the peak of the origin court, he sensed Sovereign Wu Zhou's aura. Could it be that only sovereigns can sense sovereigns? Zhou Xuanji thought in doubt. Previously, it was all thanks to Little Sovereign that he could find the Sword Emperor. Now, he could rely on himself to capture the aura of a supreme being. With that thought in mind, his figure flashed, and he directly teleported in front of Supreme Wu Zhou. There was a pagoda here that only had 2 floors. The door was open, and it was completely unguarded. Sovereign Wu Zhou sat on the blue jade throne and looked at Zhou Xuanji with a smile. He praised in amazement, very well fused. As expected of the absolute invasion, Saint Physique. The fusion is so perfect, and it doesn't require a long time to consolidate. Zhou Xuanji, your serendipity is really amazing. This kid really had too many fortuitous encounters, so many that it made him somewhat envious. Back then, he had relied on the world's serendipity to rise up, and he could not compare to Zhou Xuanji at all. Perhaps the world's serendipity had been perfected after going through him, which was why Zhou Xuanji's path was so smooth. No matter what, in Sovereign Wuzhou's eyes, Zhou Xuanji was the best candidate to be the sovereign. I'll cut to the chase. It won't be long before I leave again. You'll have to rely on yourself to become a supreme being. Understand? Sovereign Wu Zhou said as he stared at Zhou Xuanji. The smile on his face disappeared and was replaced with a serious look. Zhou Xuanji nodded and asked, "What gift are you going to give me?" Sovereign Wu Zhou rolled his eyes at him and said, "Why are you in such a hurry? Let me finish my explanation first." Explain? Zhou Xuanji frowned. The Kunlun Origin Court's calamity had just ended, and Sovereign Wu Zhou was in a hurry to leave. Could it be that something had happened? Even if he was unwilling to be left out, there was no need to leave so quickly. In another place, I have enemies. I'm taking a risk by coming back this time, so I must hurry back. From now on, I won't be coming back again. Sovereign Wu Zhou could see through Zhou Xuanji's doubts and said. Zhou Xuanji asked curiously, "Is the other place a universe created by the sovereigns of the past, or is it an unknown domain that has always existed?" Sovereign Wu Zhou looked at him with a faint smile and said, "Are you interested? Then you should go and take a look yourself. Don't regret it." Having heard this, Zhou Xuanji fell into deep thought. What was hidden in the unknown domain? Who was Sovereign Wu Zhou's enemy? Was it the sovereigns of the past, or was it someone from another place? The more he thought about it, the more curious he felt. This sovereign has suppressed the Sword Emperor and Sovereign Darkness in an independent space. Their cultivation has been sealed by this sovereign, suppressing them to Origin Fusion Divine, Lord Jioming. I will let you in later, and their lives will be in your hands. What do you think of this gift? Sovereign Wu Zhou said with a smile, as though he was giving Zhou Xuanji a great deal. Zhou Xuanji rejoiced in his heart, but he pretended to be confused and asked, "Aren't you afraid that they will kill me?" Sovereign Wu Zhou shook his head and said, "Impossible. Don't pretend. As long as they die, you can come out. Of course, you can come out any time you want. As for them, they will either die or be trapped here forever." He said it casually, but Zhou Xuanji could sense his domineeringness. They were all sovereigns, but he did not take the Sword Emperor and Sovereign Darkness seriously at all. Zhou Xuanji sighed in his heart. He did not even see how Sovereign Wu Zhou won. "Are you ready?" Sovereign Wu Zhou asked. After that, he stood up. Zhou Xuanji nodded. Sovereign Wu Zhou waved his right hand, and Zhou Xuanji disappeared from the tower. A mysterious smile appeared on his face as he mumbled, "Zhou Xuanji, will you be the hope of Kunlun Origin Court? I will wait for you over there." In a pale space, there were no mountains or islands other than the surging ocean. The Sword Emperor and Sovereign Darkness were sitting in the air to recover from their injuries. They were 1,000 miles apart and did not disturb each other. Zhou Xuanji's sudden appearance above the ocean shocked them so much that they opened their eyes at the same time. Sensing Zhou Xuanji's aura, they heaved a sigh of relief. He was captured too? The Sword Emperor frowned with a grave expression. Sovereign Darkness smiled mockingly. He was already prepared to kill Zhou Xuanji. Now was the perfect time. Sovereign Wu Zhou threw him in, giving him a chance. "Do you want to come to me together, or do you want me to kill you one by one?" Zhou Xuanji's voice resounded across the ocean, and the two sovereigns' faces darkened. This brat, so arrogant. The two sovereigns charged toward Zhou Xuanji. When they saw Zhou Xuanji clearly, they stopped. Now, Zhou Xuanji had a head of silver hair and an extraordinary aura. He was completely different from before. "This is the sole sovereign." The Sword Emperor's expression changed slightly as he muttered to himself. No wonder this brat was so arrogant. Sovereign Darkness snorted. "Brat, you think you can kill me just because you have become the sole sovereign? I'm afraid you're still asleep." After that, he attacked. Chapter 846. Zhou Xuanji glanced at the Sword Emperor and Sovereign Darkness and said with a condescending smile, "Are you panicking now? Weren't you very arrogant before?" Now that he looked at the Sword Emperor and Sovereign Darkness, Zhou Xuanji's mood was completely different. In his eyes, these two sovereigns were no longer a threat. Although their cultivation was still higher than his, he did not feel that they were much of a threat, not even a little bit dangerous. Confidence. Absolute confidence. Other than the sovereigns, Zhou Xuanji could look down on everyone. He wanted to test his power too. Boom! Before the Sword Emperor and Sovereign Darkness could speak, Zhou Xuanji unleashed his aura. Silver gales wrapped around his body, creating a tornado on the surface of the ocean. Umph! You are too arrogant. Sovereign Darkness snorted coldly and attacked first. He raised his right hand, and a black trident appeared in his hand. He grasped it with one hand and thrust it toward Zhou Xuanji. Boom! The violent divine energy transformed into a black dragon and charged toward Zhou Xuanji with extreme speed, intending to swallow him whole. Zhou Xuanji swung his right hand, and the life and death emperor sword appeared out of nowhere. His sword chi swept across and dispersed the black dragon. Pa! The life and death emperor sword landed in his hand. He turned around and looked at Sovereign Darkness. The sword emperor took this opportunity. Millions of sword shadows appeared in front of him, all pointing at Zhou Xuanji. The millions of swords moved together, shaking the heavens and earth and overturning the seas. Almost instantly, the millions of sword shadows crashed into Zhou Xuanji. Inverse chaos, divine ability. The millions of sword shadows turned around and charged toward the Sword Emperor. Now, the gap between them was not big. Zhou Xuanji's inverse chaos divine ability could also work against the Sword Emperor's origin fusion divine energy. The Sword Emperor's expression changed drastically. He quickly dodged. Just when he stopped, Zhou Xuanji appeared before him. Their eyes met, and their faces were less than 10 centimeters apart. At this moment, the Sword Emperor saw a pair of extremely cold eyes. The purple radiance in those eyes seemed to represent death. He had not seen such eyes for a long time. Boom! Zhou Xuanji's sword chi exploded suddenly and sent the Sword Emperor flying away. Then he slashed with his sword. Ultimate Chaos Dao. Billions of sword chi inundated the Sword Emperor from all directions. The sword chi exploded, sweeping up a vast mist like the sea in the sky. The darkness sovereign transformed into a black gust of wind, rushing over with a momentum that could engulf the heavens. Countless black-colored divine weapons shot out from within, densely packed with all sorts of divine weapons. Zhou Xuanji laughed condescendingly as the exterminating divine light shot out from his eyes. With a sweep of the divine light, all the soldiers stopped. He turned around and walked towards the darkness supremacy, as if he was taking a leisurely stroll in a courtyard, neither hurried nor slow. The white clothes on his body fluttered in the wind, and his silver hair was like a myriad of silver strands dancing in the wind. The elegant demeanor of a supremacy was fully displayed. During the battle, he had a smile on his face. His smile was so high-spirited and insufferably arrogant. When his smile fell into the eyes of the Dark Sovereign, it was an enormous humiliation. A mere origin fusion divine lord dared to humiliate him like this. The Dark Sovereign's rage grew exponentially, and he couldn't restrain his anger. He immediately let out a loud roar and penetrated the area sealed by the exterminating divine light, charging toward Zhou Xuanji like a demon that had lost its mind. The Sword Emperor also flew out from the explosion and pincered Zhou Xuanji with the Darkness Sovereign. Boom! 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 The three fought intensely in this pale space. Their figures crisscrossed as they unleashed all kinds of divine abilities. The explosions shook the ocean, and the waves looked like they were going to break through the sky. Inside the Supreme Tower, Autark Wu Zhou was watching the battle with great interest. Not bad. This brat adapted too quickly. I even suspect that he was a soul sovereign before this, he said with a mocking smile. Such an evaluation was enough to show how satisfied he was with Zhou Xuanji. After that, he waved his right hand, and the 12 Rule Ancestors appeared in the tower. The Rule Ancestors were stunned. Seeing Sovereign Wu Zhou, they knelt down. Greetings, Sovereign! Their voices were trembling. They were excited and anxious, but most of them were ashamed and uneasy. They did not take care of the Kunlun origin court, so they were too ashamed to face Sovereign Wu Zhou. Autarch Wu Zhou looked down at them and said, "The sovereign ranking has been reactivated to select the next autarch. All of you must ensure fairness and impartiality. Otherwise, I can kill you with a single thought no matter where I am. Do you understand?" The 12 rule ancestors agreed in fear and trepidation. Their hearts were pounding. Could it be that Sovereign Wu Zhou knew about their previous actions? At the thought of this, they could not help but feel a lingering fear. They made up their minds not to have too much private contact with the divine ranges in the future. Sovereign Wu Zhou gave some instructions, and the 12 rule ancestors took note of them. Void boundary. Namutiani wandered around as though he was looking for something. Wang Buao and young Heavenly Lord followed closely behind him. "Range Master, what are you looking for?" Young Heavenly Lord could not help but ask. They had been in this void boundary for more than a dozen days, but Namu Tiani's cultivation had not improved at all. Namu Tiani replied without looking back, "You will understand in the future. Follow me closely, or else don't blame me if you miss this opportunity." Young Heavenly Lord frowned. He was even more curious. Wang Buao said with a smile, "Brat, why are you in such a hurry? Just follow me. Putting everything else aside, you are not as good as Zhou Xuanji in terms of temperament." Zhou Xuanji. Young Heavenly Lord's eyelids twitched wildly. He felt extremely complicated at the mention of this name. When he first met Zhou Xuanji, he did not take Zhou Xuanji seriously at all. But now, Zhou Xuanji had far surpassed him in both strength and reputation. Even Namu Tiani treated Zhou Xuanji politely. Young Heavenly Lord felt complicated every time he thought of this. Where is he right now? Young Heavenly Lord asked in confusion. Sovereign Wu Zhou had already overcome the crisis and resurrected all the dead. The sovereign list had been reopened. But at this moment, Zhou Xuanji, who was the most prestigious among the younger generation, was nowhere to be seen. Wang Buao's eyes flickered as he replied, "I don't know. He should be in closed-door cultivation. Every time that guy appears, he becomes stronger. In addition, his son has already shown his brilliance. Maybe he will become a formidable opponent for you and me in the future. Don't underestimate Zhou Tanhua. Although he is Zhou Xuanji's son, the age gap between the two is almost negligible. Zhou Tanhua's aptitude is not inferior to his father's." Hearing this, young Heavenly Lord's face turned gloomy. Being surpassed by Zhou Xuanji was already hard enough for him. If even Zhou Xuanji's son surpassed him, he would collapse at the thought of it. Namu Tiani, who was walking in front, listened to their conversation and sighed inwardly. You might really be surpassed by his son. He remembered Zhou Tanhua. When he first met him, he had a strong premonition. This kid will definitely be the next Zhou Xuanji. I must find that thing quickly. Otherwise, the Tiani divine range will not be able to compete in the upcoming general trend. Namu Tiani thought in his mind. His eyes became firm. At the same time, Zhou Xuanji was still fighting with the Sword Emperor and the Dark Sovereign. He didn't use his full strength to kill the two sovereigns. Instead, he used them to hone his combat ability. His previous breakthroughs were too fast. He had to digest them through battles. Chapter 847. Above the sea, Zhou Xuanji stood in the air with his eyes closed. No matter how the Darkness Sovereign and the Sword Emperor attacked, they could not break through the inverse chaos divine ability. He returned to where he came from. The two supreme beings were incomparably sullen. Unprecedented humiliation filled their chests, ready to explode at any time. Damn it, this kid is actually still comprehending. Looking at Zhou Xuanji with his eyes closed, the Darkness Sovereign was furious. But no matter how angry he was, he could not harm Zhou Xuanji. At the Origin Fusion Divine Lord Realm, he could not break through the inverse Chaos Divine Art. He suddenly turned his head and looked angrily at Sword Monarch. He scolded, "You don't know the divine arts of your anti-Kunlun?" When the Sword Emperor heard this, he nearly exploded in anger. What did that mean? Blame him? He angrily said, even without the inverse chaos divine art, can you defeat him? The situation of this battle wasn't decided by the inverse chaos divine ability, but by the fact that Zhou Xuanji was far stronger than them. If it wasn't for Zhou Xuanji not acting, they would have died long ago. After the Sword Emperor cursed, he started to think of a way to escape. If they continued to fight, only death awaited them. After all, Sovereign Wu Zhou was still watching from outside. Even if he could defeat Zhou Xuanji, he would still be in Sovereign Wu Zhou's hands. Damn it, they're both supremes. Why is he so strong? Wu Zhou from the Kunlun Origin Court isn't this strong, he gritted his teeth. In the anti-Kunlun, he had also met Paragon Wu Zhou. In fact, he had even stepped on Paragon Wu Zhou to rise to the top. The two Kunlun Origin Courts regarded each other as anti-Kunlun and felt superior to each other. The other party was just an illusion. The Sword Emperor's Dao heart was completely shaken. Was there really no way to escape? Zhou Xuanji did not know what his enemy was thinking. He was currently comprehending the source of his soul. During the battle, he could clearly see the souls of the Sword Emperor and the Darkness Sovereign. The Sword Emperor's soul color was different from the souls of the Kunlun Origin Court. As for the Darkness Sovereign, only a wisp of black gas was left of his soul. He had long lost his sense of self. Since he could peer into the soul, he could directly absorb it. It wasn't exaggeration to say that if he wanted to kill the Sword Emperor and the Darkness Sovereign, it would only take a single thought. But he needed a whetstone now. The battle continued. 10 hours later, Zhou Xuanji suddenly opened his eyes and coldly laughed. Are you ready to die? Hearing this, the Sword Emperor and the Darkness Supremacy suddenly retreated, distancing themselves from him. Zhou Xuanji raised the Emperor's Sword of Life and Death and held the blade vertically in front of him. The cold light in his eyes and the blade's cold light reflected off each other, and killing intent instantly filled the entire pale white space. You won't die in vain. Your cultivation will help me go further. Zhou Xuanji's lips curled up in a condescending smile. The eyelids of the Sword Emperor and the Dark Sovereign twitched. Within the Supreme Tower, Autarch Wu Zhou sat cross-legged in midair, quietly cultivating. He suddenly opened his eyes and saw Zhou Xuanji in the palace. Just like when he entered, other than the fact that his aura had become more reserved, there were no other changes. Even his white clothes were not wrinkled. His face was calm, and the corners of his mouth were slightly raised. He was neither arrogant nor sharp. Origin Fusion Monarch Ba Ming, not bad. However, you only increase your cultivation by this much after absorbing their cultivation. It seems like the invading venerable physique has a huge appetite. The more he looked at Zhou Xuanji, the more satisfied he was. He had lived for so long, and there were not many geniuses who could stand shoulder to shoulder with Zhou Xuanji. If Zhou Xuanji could become the Kunlun Origin Court, he would be completely at ease. Thank you, Autarch, for this great gift. Zhou Xuanji cupped his fist with a smile. He was sincere in his words. Absorbing the Sword Emperor's cultivation had transformed his sword's way, and absorbing the Darkness Sovereign's cultivation had added a trace of darkness law to his body. Although it was just a trace, it was always difficult at the beginning. At least it helped him build the foundation for cultivating the darkness law. Sovereign Wu Zhou nodded and said, "It's time for you to go back. Did your divine range encounter any trouble recently? It's not a big deal. It's just being surrounded by the original divine range. I hope you don't start killing too early." Zhou Xuanji nodded and left with a bow. After he left the Supreme Tower, Sovereign Wu Zhou smiled and mumbled, "It's time for me to go back too." Just when he finished speaking, a beam of light flew out from his body and quickly disappeared from the top of the tower. On the other side, Zhou Xuanji came to the Kunlun Origin Court. He took out the Tri-Phoenix Qilin carriage and drove it. Since Sovereign Wu Zhou said that it was not a big deal, it meant that his Divine Range Guardian formation worked and blocked the enemies outside the Divine Range. Zhou Xuanji sat on the bed and focused his attention on the Darkness Law. After comprehending the soul origin, he became very interested in this kind of law. Once he could master the 3,000 origins, he would become a great sovereign. The fusion of 3,000 origins was the sovereign law. However, he still had a lot of doubts about the sovereign law. He took out the lesser supreme sword and asked, "After you leave the Kunlun origin court, will your strength drop a lot?" Little Sovereign flew out and replied, "What will happen? The sovereign's divine power is cultivated by us. Before we leave, we will give up a strand of the sovereign's divine power to protect the Kunlun origin court. As long as the next sovereign appears, this strand of divine power will help the next sovereign soar." Zhou Xuanji immediately felt relieved. Little Sovereign looked at him and sighed. "Kid, you are really powerful. You have already obtained the darkness law. Your path to the sovereign has officially begun." Zhou Xuanji raised his brow and replied with a smile, "That's natural, but I'm still far from the great sovereign realm. Take your time. Next, I will develop the Emperor Sword Divine range." He must make the Emperor Sword Divine range a Super Divine range. If possible, he even hoped that the Emperor Sword Divine range would become a Sovereign Divine range. Little Sovereign said meaningfully, "The Sovereign's Divine range often doesn't have a good ending. You have to think about it carefully." Zhou Xuanji nodded. He had long heard about this. A divine range that had given birth to a sovereign would always be targeted by future generations. Stepping on the predecessors to rise was the norm no matter where it was. But Zhou Xuanji still had to do it. As for the future, he would leave it to future generations. Even if the Emperor's Sword Divine range was destroyed, it was because the future generations didn't live up to expectations. Void Boundary. Nemu Tianyi suddenly stopped and cried out in pleasant surprise, "I found it! I found it! Ha ha ha!" He laughed crazily as his body trembled. Wang Buao and young Heavenly Lord looked at each other in dismay. Nemu Tianyi turned around and laughed maniacally. "I found a treasure that can make the Tianyi Divine range dominate. I will make you stand shoulder to shoulder with Zhou Xuanji." The two were pleasantly surprised when they heard this, but they still had doubts in their hearts. What made Nemu Tianyi so excited? It was the first time they saw Nemu Tianyi lose control like this. "Follow me." Nemu Tianyi waved his right hand and disappeared with Wang Buao and young Heavenly Lord. Not long after they disappeared, a figure flew over. Surprisingly, it was Luan Pinnacle. Luan Pinnacle was in a weird state. His body was stiff and his face was dull. There was a black worm lying on his forehead. It was half the size of a palm and had 8 legs. It looked hideous and terrifying. His mouth was half open as he mumbled, "I must find you. I must find him." Chapter 848. Kunlun Universe. It had been decades since Sovereign Wu Zhou returned and suppressed the Sword Emperor and the Darkness Sovereign. The Kunlun Origin Court had regained its peace. Every origin city was bustling with activity again. Because of Sovereign Wu Zhou's divine ability, the dead could be resurrected. The Kunlun Origin Court didn't need time to recover. However, there were still fights in the peace. Especially after the Sovereign list was released, the competition for geniuses began. At this moment, the Emperor's Sword Divine range was surrounded by billions of creatures. At a glance, the Emperor's Sword Divine range was surrounded by countless creatures. Enchanted artifacts and mounts were everywhere. The massive Emperor's Sword Divine range was completely surrounded. The Emperor's Sword Divine range's protective array was still open, preventing these creatures from rushing in. Other than the original Divine range creatures, many geniuses were stationed here, waiting for Zhou Xuanji to appear so that they could use him as a stepping stone to fame. When do you think Zhou Xuanji will appear? What is he doing? Is he afraid? A man in blue asked impatiently with his arms crossed in front of his chest. There were 6 geniuses in front of him, and they were equally impatient. They had been waiting here for too long. Not only them, but many creatures were complaining about this every day. "Let's wait a little longer," a lady in red said softly. She looked cold. She was Emperor Red Dragon, who brought Zhou Xuanji and the others to the Kunlun Origin Court. At that time, she was stopped by the Void Boundary 13 Emperors. She had no choice but to hand Zhou Xuanji and the others over to old ancestor Xin, which eventually led to them being sold to the Longbow Divine Range. Ever since Zhou Xuanji's rise, she had been paying special attention to his news. This guy, who was once as insignificant as a bug, had become someone she couldn't even look up to. This made her feel extremely complicated. Emperor Red Dragon looked toward the Emperor's Sword Divine Range. At this moment, the Emperor's Sword Divine Range was so majestic. It wasn't any weaker than her Sacred Red Divine Range. When would she be able to establish such a supreme force? Tri-Phoenix Qilin Carriage. Zhou Xuanji is here. A cry of surprise suddenly rang out, causing countless living beings to turn their heads to look. The Tri-Phoenix Qilin carriage came galloping over. The three phoenixes and the Qilin looked so majestic and awe-inspiring. The living beings stood up one after another, setting off magnificent waves in this part of the Kunlun cosmos. Zhou Xuanji, he's an existence that sits in the same row as the sovereign bloodline master. How strong do you think he is right now? No matter how strong he is just a heaven's favorite. Now that we have so many people here, what is there to fear? He's here. What are you waiting for? Prepare for battle. Let's defeat Zhou Xuanji together and pull him down from his godly altar. Ah, that's right. Let's work together first. When Zhou Xuanji's momentum drops, no one will be able to bully him. An uproar broke out. Everyone thought that they could defeat Zhou Xuanji with their combined strength. Emperor Red Dragon gazed at the Tri-Phoenix Qilin carriage with a complicated expression. She felt both anticipation and apprehension. The Tri-Phoenix Qilin carriage sped towards the Emperor's Sword Divine Range without any intention of stopping. Immediately, several Origin Fusion Divine Lords rushed towards the Tri-Phoenix Qilin carriage with unstoppable momentum. Oomph! A cold snort came from within the carriage. Its might shook the entire universe, suppressing all living beings to the point of suffocation. How could this be? All the living beings widened their eyes. The Origin Fusion Divine Lords who were charging ahead also stopped in fright. A vast and boundless aura enveloped this part of the universe. So strong. Emperor Red Dragon, was covered in cold sweat. She looked at the Tri-Phoenix Qilin carriage in horror. He really grew stronger again. The most mysterious legend about Zhou Xuanji was his speed of growth. Every time he disappeared, his power would grow explosively. This was also the reason why he could continue to dominate the top of the sovereign list. If you don't want to die, retreat now. Zhou Xuanji's cold voice came. Just when he finished speaking, the curtains in front of the carriage were lifted. Two heads flew out and landed on the billions of living beings ahead. All eyes fell on these two people's heads. Many living beings had seen Zhou Xuanji before. Seeing the Sword Emperor's head, they were stunned. Why did Zhou Xuanji throw out his own head? Hold on, wasn't that Zhou Xuanji? Was it Zhou Fa? No, that head's eyes were emitting a horrifying murderous aura. It was definitely not Zhou Fa. And the head beside it was equally terrifying. It's the Sword Emperor and the Darkness Sovereign. An Origin Fusion Divine Lord cried out in horror. His voice resounded across the entire universe. Wah! The heads of two sovereigns. Billions of living beings fled immediately. In less than 5 breaths, the entire universe quieted down. Such a spectacular scene was witnessed by the living beings in the nearby divine ranges. All the divine ranges were in an uproar. Panic and shock filled the air. The disciples of the Emperor's Sword Divine Range also saw it with their divine will. They were more excited than anything else. Their grand teacher had returned. Father is too powerful. How did he pick up the heads of two sovereigns? Zhou Shaoxian hugged Jiang Shui's arm and said excitedly. They stood in the courtyard and looked at the horizon like a pair of sisters. Jiang Shui smiled proudly and said, "What do you mean picked up? They must have been killed by your father. Don't you know how powerful your father's poison is? No matter how unbelievable it is, he can do it." Zhou Shaoxian felt that it made sense. Her father might have really killed the Sword Emperor and the Darkness Sovereign with his own hands. Thinking of this, she became even more curious. How did her father do it? Before she could continue speaking, Zhou Xuanji's voice came. All disciples, listen up. From now on, no one is allowed to leave without my order. Cultivate with peace of mind. I hope that the Emperor's Sword Divine Range can become a superior divine range or even a super divine range. And I want to fight for the sovereign. His tone was so overbearing, so insufferably arrogant. All the disciples felt their blood boiling after hearing this. They couldn't hold back their excitement. Super divine range. Sovereign. Even Zhou Tanhua, Chang Xian, Daoya Old Man, Ren Niming, Sheng Tiandao, and the others were overwhelmed with emotions after hearing this. What surprised them the most wasn't Zhou Xuanji's ambition, but that Zhou Xuanji dared to say it out loud. Even with the Divine Range Guardian Array, there must be many powerful cultivators who could spy on the inside of the Emperor's Sword Divine Range. Zhou Xuanji had yet to enter, and he said it in public. This was obviously a declaration of war. A declaration of war against the entire sovereign list. A declaration of war against the entire Kunlun origin court. Our Grand Teacher is so mighty, so domineering. I must become someone like him. Impossible. There's only one Grand Teacher in the universe. Only one person deserves to be called Zhou Xuanji. Yeah, you dare to dream about it? You are courting death. Without our Grand Teacher, we would still be mortals. This body of ours lives for our Grand Teacher. All the realms in the Emperor's Sword Divine Range were in an uproar. All the disciples were excitedly discussing Zhou Xuanji's words. At the same time, the Tri-Phoenix Qilin carriage landed in the courtyard where Jiang Shui lived. After landing, Jiang Shui and Zhou Shaoxian came up to him. Wow, father, what happened to your hair? Zhou Shaoxian asked in surprise. She looked at Zhou Xuanji with eyes full of excitement. She suddenly wanted to have hair like Zhou Xuanji's. Chapter 849. This is a symbol of growing stronger. Zhou Xuanji smiled as he looked at Jiang Shui. His eyes were full of tenderness. Seeing this, Zhou Shaoxian curled her lips. Every time Zhou Xuanji came back, he would look for her mother. She sighed in her heart. Even though she was full of curiosity, she had no choice but to leave. Only Zhou Xuanji and Jiang Shui were left in the courtyard. Zhou Xuanji pulled his wife to sit down at the stone table. Hurry up and tell me. Jiang Shui propped up her cheeks with her hands and urged him with a smile. Zhou Xuanji pinched her face and told her everything that had happened during this period of time from the beginning. Knowing that Zhou Xuanji had become the sole sovereign and killed the Sword Emperor and the Darkness Sovereign, even Jiang Shui, who was full of confidence in Zhou Xuanji, was stunned. She had guessed many possibilities, but she did not expect him to have such a great opportunity. How long has it been? In just a few decades, Zhou Xuanji was already comparable to the mortal sovereign. She couldn't help but fall into a trance. Seeing her expression, Zhou Xuanji couldn't help but burst into laughter. He liked it when she was so shocked. It gave him a sense of accomplishment. What are you going to do next? Look for other origin rules? Jiang Shui asked curiously. Her eyes were filled with anticipation. Zhou Xuanji replied with a smile. I will accompany you. I will stay in the divine range from now on. With his strength and reputation, there was no need for him to go out and fight for his fame. Next, he only needed to stay in the Emperor's Sword Divine Range and wait for the geniuses to challenge him. Without leaving the Emperor's Sword Divine Range, he had defeated countless enemies. Then, you have to teach me more cultivation. I don't care about your cultivation anymore, Jiang Shui said with a smile. Jiang Shui said with a smile. She was in a good mood. Zhou Xuanji staying was naturally what she was most happy to see. The couple continued to chat. Sometimes, they talked about their disciples' cultivation, sometimes about the Kunlun origin court, and sometimes about the past. The news about Zhou Xuanji killing the Sword Emperor and the Darkness Sovereign also began to spread in the Kunlun origin court. Most of the creatures treated this as a joke. The Sword Emperor and the Darkness Sovereign were killed by the sovereigns. How could they be killed by Zhou Xuanji? Those creatures who were scared away also came back to their senses. All of them felt humiliated. Immediately, a large wave of creatures began to gather against the Emperor's Sword Divine range. However, Zhou Xuanji's aura was really powerful. Without a powerful cultivator leading them, the Emperor's Sword Divine range was not in danger for the time being. Analyze that the sword owner has reached 1,600 years old. Gotcha started. Ding. Congratulations, the sword owner has obtained Myriad Life Fusion Venerable Breaker Sword, Sword Emperor Divine Crown. The sword spirit's voice resounded in Zhou Xuanji's mind. Zhou Xuanji was currently refining the law of darkness and had obtained a fusion sword, causing him to open his eyes and look at it. Sword name, Venerable Breaker Sword Level, Myriad Fusion Description. Countless paragons have been born in the various courts. There are paragons of laws and grand paragons. The Paragon Destroyer Sword is a sword that specializes in slaying paragons. It will absorb the paragon's divine power to grow stronger. To use this sword, one needs to be at least at the Origin Fusion Divine Lord level. Specialized in killing Supremes? Interesting. Zhou Xuanji smiled and asked about the origin of the Sword Emperor Divine Crown. The Sword Emperor Divine Crown was a treasure that the Supreme Legendary Sword System had specially created for him using special materials. The Divine Crown contained a huge amount of sword intent. When faced with a life or death situation, the sword intent would automatically explode and kill the enemy. Of course, this sword intent wasn't invincible. If the enemy was too strong, killing the enemy would just be a joke. Zhou Xuanji took out the Sword Emperor Divine Crown. The crown was bluish-purple in color. It was very gorgeous and exquisitely carved. There were 3 swords on the top edge, with the tips pointing upward. After he put it on, his entire temperament suddenly changed. His temperament became more majestic, becoming more and more similar to the Sword Emperor. He smiled with satisfaction. After putting on the Sword Emperor Divine Crown, he felt his consciousness become more open-minded. There was an indescribable sense of comfort. Immediately, he closed his eyes and continued to comprehend the law of darkness. Not long after, he was pleasantly surprised to find that after putting on the Sword Emperor Divine Crown, his comprehension of the law of darkness had become faster. What a great treasure, Zhou Xuanji thought. He couldn't help but smile. He was sitting in the courtyard cultivating. Very few people disturbed him. Generally speaking, Chang Xian was the one who came to inform him of anything. As for Jiang Shui, she was busy cultivating. After Zhou Tanhua became a Dao ancestor, Zhou Shaoxian followed closely and also reached the Dao ancestor realm. The cultivation of most disciples in the Emperor's Sword Divine range was constantly improving. On this day, Chang Xian once again came to find Zhou Xuanji. She stood respectfully to the side and reported in a soft voice, "Master, something strange has happened in the Kunlun Origin Court recently. Our Emperor's Sword Divine range must pay attention to it." Zhou Xuanji asked without opening his eyes, "What is it?" Chang Xian replied, "A strange insect has appeared in the Kunlun Origin Court. Anyone who comes into contact with it will lose their mind. Even those at the peak of Almighty will have gone crazy. They are slaughtering creatures everywhere. So far, tens of thousands of creatures have been controlled by this insect. Some have high cultivation, some have low." Hearing this, Zhou Xuanji opened his eyes. Even Luan Pinnacle has suffered. Luan Pinnacle was an expert comparable to a sovereign range master. Zhou Xuanji asked, "Didn't the Origin Court do anything? If it was someone else, he might not care. But Luan Pinnacle had taught him a divine ability. He was indebted to him. He had to go and rescue him. They have taken action. The Void Boundary Heavenly Sages and Void Boundary War Gods that were sent out are either dead or under the control of that strange insect," Chang Xian said with a frown. Chang Xian said with a frown, worry flashing in her eyes. They had just experienced the sovereign calamity, and now such a strange insect had appeared. It was really disturbing. The most important thing was that there were rumors that Sovereign Wu Zhou had left the Kunlun Origin Court again. Perhaps it was because of this that such a strange insect appeared. Zhou Xuanji nodded and said, "I understand. I will go out for a while." I will leave the trivial matters of the Emperor Sword Divine range to you. Changxian bowed and agreed. Zhou Xuanji, he flew out of the Emperor's Sword Divine range. Just as he was about to use the 10,000 Worlds Piercer, a figure appeared beside him. It was Li Xianwang. Shu Longhua was following behind Li Xianwang. The two had obviously been waiting for some time. Zhou Xuanji, you finally came out. I have something to discuss with you, Li Xianhuang said with a smile. Li Xianhuang smiled, as if they were old friends. Zhou Xuanji glanced at them and asked, "What's the matter?" He didn't feel too much disgust towards Li Xianhuang. The other party was waiting here and didn't disturb the Emperor's Sword Divine range. You came out this time because you want to save the Will Peak, right? After all, he has taught you divine abilities. Such kindness should be repaid. I came to find you precisely because of this matter. You have already become the sole sovereign, and your status is higher than mine. The appearance of that strange insect is not a coincidence. I found a clue, and I hope you can go check it out and deduce your fate. Li Xianwang said sincerely, his eyes fixed on Zhou Xuanji. Shu Longhua followed up, that's right. I suspect that the Dark Sovereign isn't dead yet, or there might be new enemies lurking around. It's also very strange for the Dark Sovereign to leave in such a hurry. The top powerhouses of the Kunlun Origin Court need to stick together. Chapter 850. Where's the clue? What do you know about that insect? Zhou Xuanji asked. He had only been in seclusion for a short while, and the Kunlun Origin Court was in trouble again. It was a problem that even the Sovereign Range Lord could not solve. He felt really helpless. Since when had the Kunlun Origin Court become so weak? Even a little trouble could destroy the Kunlun Origin Court. Li Xianwang did not know what he was thinking about and replied, "We came to you because we don't know much about that insect. We can bring you to the clue. It's in the Sea of Nothingness at the edge of the Kunlun Origin Court." Zhou Xuanji nodded. He was not afraid of their schemes. The three immediately left. Along the way, Li Xianhuang introduced Zhou Xuanji to the powerful cultivators who were possessed by the strange insects, as well as the specific effects of the insects. After Zhou Xuanji understood, he was shocked. In summary, there was only one thing. No matter how powerful the cultivator was, he would lose his mind and become violent and murderous after being possessed by the strange insects. The most confusing thing was that these people seemed to be looking for something. More accurately, they were being controlled by the strange insects. All of them repeated the same sentence. "I must find you. I must find him." Zhou Xuanji was interested in the strange insects. Could they have some kind of rule power? Half an hour later, under Li Xianhuang and Shu Longhua's lead, Zhou Xuanji came to the Sea of Nothingness. The place was filled with violet qi, and many asteroids were floating around. They stopped before a stone stele. The stele was charred black and looked like a tree trunk that had been cut in half. There was nothing on it. "This is the stele." Someone saw a strange insect crawling out of the stele. Every time this happened, the word punishment would appear on the stele. Li Xianwang said with a deep voice. He looked at the charred stele warily. Punishment? Zhou Xuanji narrowed his eyes and immediately thought of Zhou Fa. He wondered if that guy had already died. Zhou Xuanji took a step forward and probed into the charred stele with his divine sense. But it was a pity that he found nothing. There was nothing in the charred stele. It was like an ordinary stone without any space-time ripples. "Are you sure?" Zhou Xuanji asked with a frown. He suspected that there was something wrong with Li Xianhuang's information. Li Xianwang nodded and said, "It's definitely here. That person is my trusted aide, and I know him very well. He will not lie to me or remember the wrong place." At their level of cultivation, how could they possibly remember things wrongly? The other possibility was that the strange insects had already moved away. Shu Longhua raised his eyebrows and asked, "Don't you feel that the atmosphere here isn't right?" With this, Zhou Xuanji and Li Xianhuang instinctively scanned their surroundings with their divine senses. Soon, their expressions changed at the same time. There was not a single trace of Tao energy in the surroundings. The Kunlun universe was filled with Tao energy. Even the passageway between the two realms and the chaotic space-time flows contain Tao energy. Looks like those bugs aren't completely mindless, Li Xianwang said with a dark expression. He raised his right hand, and a pitch-black halberd appeared in his hand. Lightning coiled around the halberd, shaking the space around it. Zhou Xuanji narrowed his eyes as billions of sword shadows appeared out of thin air. With them as the center, they began to circle recklessly, engulfing the surrounding void boundary sea and dispersing the purple mist. Black bugs the size of human heads appeared one after another. They had 2 pairs of wings and were of different shapes. Their exoskeletons were black and shiny. These strange insects had a pair of dark green eyes, and they all stared fixedly at Zhou Xuanji and the others. Even Zhou Xuanji, who had already become the sole sovereign, sensed danger. He couldn't help but frown. Where did these strange insects come from? Ever since he became the sole sovereign, this was the first time he had such a horrifying feeling. At this moment, spatial cracks began to appear around the strange black bugs. Creatures emanating powerful auras stepped out from the cracks. Among them were great chakra pinnacle cultivators. These creatures looked like walking corpses. Their postures were stiff, and their faces were hideous. They kept muttering, "I must find you. I must find him. I must find you. I must find him. I must find you. I must find him." They were all repeating this sentence. Their voices converged together, making one's scalp numb. Shu Longhua's face turned grim. He slammed his palms together and cried, "Overwhelming righteous energy." Just as he spoke, a powerful radiance burst out from his body. A majestic divine shadow condensed behind him and grew taller. This move was quite similar to the sage manifestation formation. The divine shadow roared furiously. His palms moved like the wind and slammed in all directions. His upper body twisted, and countless blue palm shadows shot out with unstoppable momentum. The strange insects and the creatures under his control all dodged. Zhou Xuanji followed suit. The delusion sword sea erupted and covered the entire void boundary. The surging sword will shock Li Xianhuang and Shu Longhua. So powerful! At this moment, waves of shock surged in their hearts. They were already shocked when they learned that Zhou Xuanji had become the sole sovereign. But in their opinion, even if Zhou Xuanji had become the sole sovereign, he should still be weaker than them. He should be about the same as the range lord of a super divine range. But now they were all shocked. Zhou Xuanji ignored their gazes. The delusion sword sea imprisoned all the strange insects and puppet creatures. Just as the delusion sword sea surged, the strange insects trembled violently and let out a strange and hoarse sound. The delusion sword sea was pushed away by their sound and dissipated in an instant. Zhou Xuanji frowned deeply. What were these things? Why was his divine energy dispelled when he approached them? He was now the sole sovereign. His divine energy could be called the supreme sovereign's divine energy. This was the divine energy that was second only to the great sovereign in the Kunlun origin court. Even such a supreme sovereign's divine energy could do nothing to the strange insects. No wonder those creatures could not withstand it. "Let's retreat first," Li Xianwang said in a deep voice. He noticed that there were more and more strange insects. There were already more than 100,000 of them. This number far exceeded his expectations. Another calamity had descended on the Kunlun origin court. Zhou Xuanji activated the exterminating divine light, which swept out and fixed all the strange insects in place. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the 3 quickly left. They shuttled through the space-time tunnel with an ugly expression. Shu Longhua sighed and said, "Could it be that another supreme existence has set its eyes on the Kunlun origin court? These strange insects could not have been formed naturally. There must be someone behind this." Li Xianhuang said with a frown, "No matter what, we must deal with it. Next, let's go back and check the history to see if there were such strange insects in the past." Shu Longhua nodded. Zhou Xuanji did not interrupt. He was thinking to himself. Suddenly, his expression changed. He turned around abruptly. Hundreds of thousands of strange insects appeared behind them like a black ocean, chasing them relentlessly. Li Xianhuang and Xu Longhua also turn around, and their expressions change drastically. Chapter 851. How do they chase us here? I can't sense their aura. Li Xianhuang cried out in shock. Fear was written all over his face. As a sovereign range lord, even he was frightened by the strange black insects. If Zhou Xuanji did not turn back, wouldn't they be controlled by the strange black insects without anyone knowing? At the thought of this, Li Xianhuang shuddered. Even when he faced the Sword Emperor, he did not feel this way. After all, when he faced the Sword Emperor, he was killed instantly by the Sword Emperor despite being accompanied by thousands of range lords. He had no time to feel fear. Xu Longhua glanced at these black insects and said softly, "Something's wrong. They seem to have something to ask of us. From the start to the end, they haven't attacked. They can follow us closely, so they can definitely attack when we stop." Having heard this, Zhou Xuanji and Li Xianhuang calmed down. It was indeed so. After they stopped, the strange black insects stopped as well. They maintained a certain distance from them and emitted a piercing sound, as though they were transmitting some kind of message. Zhou Xuanji reached out with his divine will and communicated with them telepathically. He was the sovereign of souls after all. Li Xianhuang and Xu Longhua could not compare to him in terms of telepathy. However, the strange black insects did not have souls, so he was not sure if they could communicate. A while later, the strange black insects suddenly flew toward another direction. After some distance, they stopped and turned to look at Zhou Xuanji and the others. It was obvious that they wanted Zhou Xuanji and the others to follow them. The three looked at each other and made a decision with their eyes. They followed the strange black insects together. The strange black insects continued ahead. Suddenly, they broke through the space-time tunnel and opened up a tunnel of absolute darkness. The three's hearts sank, but they did not stop. They took out their enchanted artifacts and spread out to illuminate the space within a radius of a few hundred meters. They advanced ahead without any obstruction. About an hour later, light finally appeared in front of them, and the three's eyes regained their focus. "What's next?" Li Xianhuang mumbled. He had never come to a cosmic space like this before, so he felt a little uneasy. Zhou Xuanji and Xu Longhua were calm, but they were more curious. After flying out of the light, they came to a dark blue universe filled with dazzling starlight. The stars here glowed with different colors, and it was as beautiful as a dream. The strange black insects continued onwards, and looking at where they were going, Zhou Xuanji and the others' expressions once again changed. A gigantic black tree stood in the center of the cosmos. Its height was impossible to estimate with the naked eye. Every leaf on it had stars, and even suns of different sizes. It was an extremely spectacular sight. The most terrifying thing was that most of the stars had the aura of living beings. They were worlds with complete ecological laws. What tree is this? Divine tree of creation? Good fortune saint tree? Li Xianhuang asked with a frown. Xu Longhua shook his head, saying, "I'm not too sure either, but it is definitely not a natural creation of the world, most likely an inauspicious object. We have to be careful. We do not know if those worlds were created by this tree or if they were captured by this tree. If it was the latter, then it would be horrifying and horrifying." Even Zhou Xuanji and Li Xianhuang were fearful. What was the purpose of this tree's existence? Although they were doubtful, they still followed. Soon, they arrived at the base of the huge black tree. The strange black insects scattered and burrowed into the leaves, quickly disappearing. The atmosphere became strange, and the entire universe fell silent. Zhou Xuanji and the other two looked around and were prepared to fight at any moment. They began communicating telepathically to prevent others from hearing them. Should we destroy this tree? No, we do not know how powerful this tree is. This is too uncanny. Should we retreat? Since we are already here, why should we retreat? Just as they muttered, some of the leaves on a massive black tree began swaying. The Luen Peak appeared with the puppets. They walked over in the air, looking extremely strange. This time, They did not repeat the same sentence. Instead, they kept their mouths shut and looked ahead without blinking. More accurately, they were looking at Zhou Xuanji and the other two. Zhou Xuanji and the other two stood back to back, each looking in a different direction. They took out their enchanted artifacts and prepared for battle. The life and death Emperor sword appeared by Zhou Xuanji's side and spun on its own, which caught Li Xianhuang and Shu Longhua's attention. This sword, Li Xianhuang's pupils contracted. He immediately guessed that it was a supreme treasure formed from the fusion of the All-Lives brush and the soul bead. He had wielded the All-Lives brush before. Although it was only for a short period of time, that power was still fresh in his mind. He did not expect this brat to refine two supreme treasures of the Kunlun origin court. He was too daring. Wasn't he afraid of the sovereign's punishment? It would definitely take time to refine these two supreme treasures. The sovereign had just left not long ago, which meant that the sovereign had tacitly approved of his actions. When Li Xianhuang thought of Zhou Tanhua obtaining the sovereign's inheritance, his heart was shrouded in a shadow. Although he was cooperating with Zhou Xuanji, he still had a strong ambition to compete for the sovereign's position. "Look over there," Shu Longhua suddenly cried out, pointing at the massive black tree. Zhou Xuanji and Li Xianhuang immediately turned around. They saw a huge seed emerging from the main trunk of the massive black tree, rapidly expanding. In less than 10 breaths of time, the seed was tens of thousands of meters tall. It was crystal clear and looked like a peach. Its surface began to crack, and a bright red juice gushed out like blood. It was a ghastly sight. A horrifying aura leaked out of the seed. Even though they were far away, Zhou Xuanji and the other two could feel it. "Sure enough, those insects lured us here as prey," Li Xianhuang said, gritting his teeth with a gloomy expression. He was the range lord of the sovereign range. How could he tolerate being tricked by insects? Zhou Xuanji and Shu Longhua's eyes turned cold. The three's eyes were locked on the bleeding seed. "I must find you. I must find him. I have already found him," Luan Feng suddenly shouted, startling Zhou Xuanji and the other two. His murderous aura soared into the sky. His face was hideous, and he had a horrifying smile on his face. He charged straight at Zhou Xuanji and the other two. The puppets followed suit, each of them bursting out with their full speed. Just as they were about to reach Zhou Xuanji and the other two, they suddenly stopped. Their expressions froze, making the atmosphere even more gloomy. Zhou Xuanji, Li Xianhuang, and Shu Longhua kept their composure. They didn't act immediately. They didn't understand the current situation. Naturally, they couldn't act recklessly. Zhou Xuanji took out the lesser supreme sword and asked in his heart, "Do you know about this tree?" Little Sovereign didn't answer immediately. After a few breaths of time, his exclamation suddenly rang in Zhou Xuanji's ears. "The evil tree outside the courtyard. Wasn't this thing suppressed by the sovereigns? Every generation of sovereigns would strengthen the seal. How did you find it?" His panicked tone made Zhou Xuanji's heart even heavier. After all, this guy was a sovereign. Even a sovereign would panic in the face of this tree. Chapter 852. What's the origin of the extra court evil tree? Why does it need every sovereign to suppress it? Zhou Xuanji asked in his heart. Apart from fear, he was more curious about the extra court evil tree. Why didn't Sovereign Wu Zhou mention this? How long has it been since the strange insect from the extra court evil tree entered the Kunlun origin court? There must have been signs before this. How could Sovereign Wu Zhou not notice it? Could it be that Sovereign Wu Zhou deliberately left this disaster behind? When he thought of Sovereign Wu Zhou's previous actions, he felt that it was very possible. This guy was too conceited. He always wanted to let the future generations bear the burden. He called it testing the future generations. However, he forgot that back then, before he grew up, it was also thanks to the previous supreme being that protected everyone from above. But now, Sovereign Wu Zhou only served for a few 100 million years before leaving. He didn't fulfill his responsibilities as a sovereign at all. No one knows the origin of the extra court evil tree, but contains spirit-controlling evil insects. Any creature that is possessed by the spirit-controlling evil insects will lose their mind. All the spirit-controlling evil insects are controlled by the spirit-controlling evil mother. The spirit-controlling evil mother seems to be looking for something. The world on the tree is the spoils of war she found on the way. Little Sovereign's voice resounded in Zhou Xuanji's ear. His voice was trembling. He gritted his teeth and said, "Brat, leave quickly, lest you get into unnecessary trouble." That brat Wu Zhou not only didn't strengthen the seal, but he also released it. Zhou Xuanji's eyes flickered as he fell in a deep thought. Immediately, he told Li Xianhuang and Shu Longhua what Little Sovereign had said, shocking them. The extra court evil tree. Isn't that a legend? Does it really exist? I have only seen it in the Origin Court's History Pavilion. There are very few records. It only says that when the extra court evil tree appears, the Kunlun Origin Court will be destroyed. There are too many legends like this. I thought they were all nonsense, Li Xianhuang sighed. His face was ugly. He already had the intention to retreat in his heart. This is an existence that even sovereigns fear. Shu Longhua said in a low voice, "Retreat." Their eyes were still locked on the huge seed. It had already bloomed. There seemed to be something hidden in the bud. They could vaguely see a figure through the petals. The spirit-controlling evil mother. That peerlessly horrifying aura grew more and more powerful, to the point where Zhou Xuanji and the other two's hearts palpitated. Zhou Xuanji said in a deep voice, "Let's retreat, but before we retreat, let's use our most powerful divine abilities. Even if we can't destroy this tree, we must at least severely injure it and buy some time for the Kunlun Origin Court." "All right." Li Xianhuang and Shu Longhua had no objections. The three of them circulated their divine power and prepared to attack. Zhou Xuanji activated the Sword Fusion Technique and Nine Soul Fusion Technique. He raised the Emperor's Sword of Life and Death with his right hand, and his aura reached its peak. Beside him, Li Xianhuang and Shu Longhua were inwardly alarmed. How did this brat's aura suddenly soar so much? Could it be that he had been suppressing his aura? Zhou Xuanji slashed with the Great Awareness Divine Slash. Li Xianhuang and Shu Longhua also took action. Three extremely powerful divine powers gathered together and rushed towards the evil tree outside the courtyard with absolute power. There was a loud bang. The evil tree outside the courtyard shook violently as the three divine powers collided with it. A shrill cry came out from the flower bud. Countless leaves of the evil tree outside the courtyard began to shake, making a strange sound. The three of them glanced at each other before disappearing from where they were at the same time. In the mortal plane, Xian Xianghua sat in the air, focusing on cultivation. More than 36 Dao flowers appeared on top of her head. Above the Dao flowers, there were 8 layers of purple clouds. She was trying to break through to the 9 vast heaven stage. Sovereign Red Dust was hovering at the side, watching quietly. She nodded slightly, showing a look of admiration as she mumbled, "It seems like he has become a lot stronger." She was confident in her teachings and inheritance. But every time Xian Xianghua's cultivation skyrocketed, it was definitely related to Zhou Xuanji. Thinking of Zhou Xuanji, she couldn't help but pinch her fingers to calculate. The next second, she furrowed her brow. She had always been able to calculate Zhou Xuanji's whereabouts. This was also the reason why she could often rescue Zhou Xuanji. But now, she couldn't calculate it at all. There was only one possibility. That was, Zhou Xuanji had already left the Kunlun Origin Court. Where did he go? Sovereign Red Dust was puzzled. She knew Zhou Xuanji's recent plans. He was competing for the Sovereign Spirit nurturing range. There was no reason for him to leave the Kunlun Origin Court. He didn't have the ability to leave either. Could he have been attacked? Sovereign Red Dust immediately flew up to Xian Xianghua and said, "Don't move. This sovereign will calculate your husband's whereabouts through you." After that, she placed her right hand on Xian Xianghua's forehead. Within the Dark Realm, Zhou Xuanji and the other two were flying at an extremely high speed. The three looked gloomy because countless spirit-controlling evil insects were chasing after them. The controlled cultivators were also following closely behind. Damn, that spirit-controlling evil mother should be here soon, Li Xianhuang said with gritted teeth. They could all sense the terrifying and oppressive aura behind them. At this moment, he was extremely regretful. If he knew this, he wouldn't have followed the spirit-controlling evil insects. He looked at Zhou Xuanji and asked, "What should we do?" Zhou Xuanji was knowledgeable. He could recognize the evil tree outside the court, and he was also the sole sovereign. He might have a way to escape. "Keep going, don't slow down," Zhou Xuanji replied calmly. Li Xianhuang frowned, but had no other choice but to acquiesce. As Shu Longhua flew, he looked around in all directions as though he was guarding against something. "Where are you going to escape to?" A cold, old woman's voice came, and the three looked back in shock. A woman wrapped in withered leaves appeared above the swarm of spirit-controlling evil insects. She had a head full of black hair and looked very young and graceful. But her face was very old, and her skin was shriveled like an old woman in her 60s or 70s. Spirit-controlling evil mother. Her eyes were cold, and tiny spirit-controlling evil insects were crawling all over her forehead. She looked extremely horrifying. Seeing her, Zhou Xuanji and the other two's hearts beat wildly. Such a spirit-controlling evil mother would make anyone tremble in fear. The spirit-controlling evil mother sped up and was getting closer and closer to them. At this moment, a ball of red qi appeared in front of them. It charged toward Zhou Xuanji and the other two with unstoppable momentum. Zhou Xuanji raised his brow and immediately guessed the other party's identity. "Mortal Sovereign, why are you running? Start the battle, or else you will lure her into the Kunlun origin court." Mortal Sovereign's cold voice came into their ears, and Li Xianhuang and Shu Longhua's expressions changed slightly. They recognized Mortal Sovereign too. Supreme crimson dust flew over their heads, heading straight for the evil mother of spirit manipulation. Zhou Xuanji turned around and charged with his sword. Li Xianhuang and Shu Longhua glanced at each other. Almost instantly, they reached a unanimous decision. "Fight!" The two moved like two meteors and charged into the swarm of spirit-controlling evil insects. Boom! Mortal qi exploded, sending countless spirit-controlling evil insects flying away. Mortal Sovereign and the spirit-controlling evil mother's palms clashed. Two extremely powerful forces clashed, shaking the dark universe. Chapter 853. Red Dust Sovereign was the most powerful cultivator below the sovereign. After all, even Zhou Xuanji, who had become the sole sovereign, was far inferior to her. She and the evil spirit controlling mother clashed, and it was hard to tell who had the upper hand. Both sides fought fiercely, surging with divine power. The spirit-controlling evil insects had no choice but to distance themselves from them. They vacated the void for tens of thousands of miles, allowing them to fight. Zhou Xuanji clashed with Luan Feng, while Li Xianhuang and Shu Longhua dealt with the other creatures controlled by the spirit-controlling evil insects. This dark space was desolate to begin with. It was like a world of living creatures, a place where they could fight to their heart's content. Facing a wheel-top cultivator who could be considered half his master, Zhou Xuanji was very domineering. With the life and death emperor sword in hand, Luan Feng was forced to retreat step by step. The wheel pinnacle divine ability was also very powerful, but it was a pity that it was reflected by the inverse chaos divine ability. His destiny manifestation technique was completely ineffective against Zhou Xuanji, who had a sovereign soul. The life and death emperor sword blocked the wheel's summit, and Zhou Xuanji cast the destiny manifestation technique. Rolling thunder clouds gathered above the wheel's summit. A gigantic figure stood above the sea of clouds, wielding a gigantic sword as it slashed down. This was the death tribulation of the peak of chakra. Zhou Xuanji looked over and realized that this figure was very similar to himself. Could it be that in the future, he would be the one to kill the Luan pinnacle? Li Xianhuang and Shu Longhua also noticed the fate manifestation. This wasn't the first time they had seen it, so they knew what it meant. That's not Zhou Xuanji, it's Zhou Tanhua, Li Xianhuang said solemnly. His voice was so weak that no one could hear him. Shu Longhua also recognized Zhou Tanhua. Zhou Tanhua had left a deep impression on him that day at the Pulse Convergence Pagoda. Good lad. He can even kill a Pequel expert. Isn't his bloodline inheritance too perfect? Shu Longhua muttered to himself, and a murderous glint flashed in his eyes. How could they allow such a prodigy to grow? Zhou Xuanji recognized that the mighty figure was his son, and he felt that it was quite funny. This kid won't be simple in the future. This posture was indeed his style. As for the hatred between him and Luan Ding, he didn't think too much about it. Although he was indebted to Luan Ding, he understood his son. Future grievances will be dealt with in the future. Facing the fate manifestation technique, even though Luan Feng was being controlled by the soul-controlling evil insect, he couldn't help but scream in agony. The killing tribulation pressure enveloped him, causing his soul and body to suffer extreme pain. He couldn't endure it at all. On this side, Zhou Xuanji had already suppressed the Wheel's summit, while Li Xianhuang and Shu Longhua had gained the upper hand. Only Autar Crimson Dust was still locked in battle. Zhou Xuanji and the others did not look down on her because of this. Instead, they admired her even more. The evil spirit controlling Mother's aura was simply too powerful, so powerful that it made their hearts palpitate. However, it was precisely in the face of such a powerful being that Crimson Dust Supremacy displayed an extremely domineering performance, and he was evenly matched with the evil spirit manipulation mother. Zhou Xuanji directly charged over. He performed the Great Li Divine Suppressor art, creating hundreds of thousands of Great Li clones to support the entire battlefield while his true self charged toward the evil mother. In the state of the sword fusion technique, his strength had already reached the pinnacle of the Origin Fusion Divine Sovereign level. Even if he were to face the evil spirit manipulation mother, he would still be able to fight it head-on, not to mention that he had Supreme Crimson Dust help. The two of them joined forces, and their auras surged. The evil mother's spirit manipulation was forced to defend. Your strength has risen so quickly, Autar Crimson Dust said softly, the corners of his lips curling up slightly. He was clearly in a very good mood. She liked this kind of Zhou Xuanji. Back then, when she fell in love with him, he was far stronger than Zhou Xuanji. So, she could not bear to see Zhou Xuanji weaker than her. In her heart, Zhou Xuanji was indomitable and fearless. No matter what kind of predicament he faced, he could deal with it calmly. Zhou Xuanji smiled and said, "It's okay, but I still can't beat you." These words were spoken from the bottom of his heart. Fighting alongside Autar Crimson Dust, at such a close distance, he could feel her vast aura. With such an aura, no wonder she was fearless in the Kunlun Origin Court. Without Sovereign Wu Zhou, she was the sovereign. The Great Li Avatar, Li Xianhuang, and Shu Longhua killed the spirit-controlling evil insect one after another. Li Xianhuang and Shu Longhua soon became invincible. They began to watch the battle between Zhou Xuanji, Autar Crimson Dust, and the Evil Mother. The more they watched, the more shocked they became. They were not surprised by Autar Crimson Dust's power. What surprised them was Zhou Xuanji. His sword's way and strange divine abilities were really unpredictable. The Evil Mother spirit manipulation evil insect often couldn't dodge in time. "I will kill you." The Evil Mother spirit manipulation evil insect suddenly let out a shrill cry. A gust of wind came from the darkness, which shocked everyone. Zhou Xuanji looked over and saw the evil tree outside the courtyard flying toward them with a majestic momentum, as though it was going to break through all the universes. Autar Crimson Dust's expression changed slightly. Suddenly, he grabbed Zhou Xuanji's right shoulder, and the two disappeared. Li Xianhuang and Shu Longhua were stunned. Escaped? They immediately came back to their senses. Cursing in their hearts, they quickly retreated. On the other side, Zhou Xuanji and Autar Crimson Dust traveled through the mortal chi. Zhou Xuanji didn't even need to fly with divine energy. He felt that Autar Crimson Dust was pushing him forward. He asked curiously, "What channel is this?" He felt that the mortal chi here was like a channel of time and space. It was very mysterious. The mortal space-time is a divine ability that I created. It's not bound by the rules of time and space. I don't think the evil mother spirit manipulation evil insect will find this place. Autar Crimson Dust replied. Autar Crimson Dust replied in a proud tone. Zhou Xuanji fell in a deep thought. Can I create such a channel with my soul source? You have already become the soul sovereign. If you want to leave the Kunlun origin court in the future, you must take me with you. I guess Nianxing might have gone outside the court. Autar Crimson Dust changed the topic and said meaningfully. She stayed in the Kunlun origin court to wait for Zhou Xuanji. Except for Zhou Xuanji, she had nothing else to miss. Zhou Xuanji asked, "You can already leave the Kunlun origin court? Isn't that an ability only great sovereigns have?" "Of course. When you absorb 10 more origin rules, you could do it too," Autar Crimson Dust replied. Autar Crimson Dust replied, his eyes filled with anticipation. No matter how long it had been, she still couldn't give up divine Nianxing. Zhou Xuanji calmly said, "If I become a sovereign, I won't leave the Kunlun origin court soon. But I can promise you that I will leave sooner or later." Autar Crimson Dust nodded and said no more. The two fell into silence. About the time it takes to burn half an incense stick had passed. They returned to the Kunlun origin court. The evil mother spirit manipulation didn't chase after them. Li Xianhuang and Xu Longhua were nowhere to be seen. Zhou Xuanji didn't ask about their whereabouts. After all, they were acquaintances. "When can Xian Xianghua come back to me?" Zhou Xuanji stopped and asked Autar Crimson Dust. Autar Crimson Dust snorted and said, "Is there such a hurry? When she becomes an origin fusion divine lord, I will let her go back. At that time, she can share the pressure for you and the Emperor's Sword Divine range." Without waiting for Zhou Xuanji to speak again, she directly turned into a wisp of mortal chi and dissipated. Zhou Xuanji stayed in place, shaking his head and laughing. Just as he was about to leave, he suddenly furrowed his brow. He looked into the depths of a universe and saw a figure in the void boundary looking at him. Chapter 854. The figure standing in the void boundary had disheveled hair and ragged clothes. His head was slightly lowered, revealing only his bloodshot right eye. He stared fixedly at Zhou Xuanji, as though there was a deep hatred in his heart. Zhou Xuanji sized him up and was curious. Who was this guy? His aura was very strong, and he had the cultivation of Origin Fusion Divine, Lord Wu Ming. However, it didn't look right. It was as if he had been possessed by a spirit-controlling evil insect. Zhou Xuanji raised his hand suddenly with a sharp look in his eyes. Pucci. The long-haired man's chest was pierced through, and black blood spurted out from his back. However, no weapon could be seen throughout the entire process. The vanishing divine sword. Shadowless, formless, and soundless. The long-haired man did not die because of this, nor did he fly into a rage. He only twisted his neck and continued to stare at Zhou Xuanji from afar. Zhou Xuanji laughed and waved his right hand. The invincible sword pierced through the man's body from behind and flew in front of Zhou Xuanji. He had used the world internalization, but he didn't absorb the divine power of the man with the loose hair. It was really strange. Could it be that this fellow's divine power is different from others? Zhou Xuanji raised his eyebrows and immediately flew towards the disheveled man. As soon as he saw him flying over, the long-haired man immediately fled. How could Zhou Xuanji let him escape? However, after coming to the void boundary, Zhou Xuanji could no longer sense his aura. Strange, why did it suddenly disappear? Zhou Xuanji mumbled. He first thought of the red dust passageway. Could it be that the long-haired man also grasped some sort of special rule and had already opened up a space-time passageway that belonged solely to him? Other than that, He couldn't think of any other reason. If he moved in the Kunlun Origin Court, he would definitely leave behind traces of aura and soul fluctuations. Zhou Xuanji shook his head and flew toward the Emperor's Sword Divine range. The Kunlun Origin Court had a lot of things to deal with recently, so he was too lazy to think about it. He had just dealt with the evil spirit controlling Mother, so he didn't want to cause any more trouble. In any case, the Kunlun Origin Court's range masters had been resurrected, so it was time to let them take action. After returning to the Emperor's Sword Divine range, Zhou Xuanji did not disturb the others. He returned to the cultivation hall and continued his seclusion. However, this trip had changed his opinion of Zhou Tianhua. Therefore, he began to carefully observe his son in addition to his cultivation. Zhou Tianhua's temperament had become more and more stable with the improvement of his cultivation. Although he still looked like a teenager, he appeared very mature. He didn't have Zhou Xuanji's high-spirited spirit, nor did he feel inferior. He was always thinking alone, and no one knew what he was thinking. When I leave in the future, I can be at ease, leaving the Emperor's Sword Divine range to him. Zhou Xuanji said with a satisfied smile. Compared to Zhou Tianhua, his elder sister Zhou Shaoxian seemed to never grow up. She always gave him a headache. Meanwhile, Zhou Tianhua sat by the lake and looked at the lake. He rested his chin on his right hand as he racked his brains. He was thinking about his sword path. He wanted to create his own sword Dao and not copy his father's path. Somehow, he seemed to have grasped something, but he couldn't clearly capture it. This feeling drove him crazy. The more he thought about it, the more he wanted it. Therefore, his mood began to calm down. The sword that was stuck in the soil beside him suddenly came out of its sheath and hovered above his head. The grass beneath him burst into light and spread out in a circle. He began comprehending the Tao. Evil Sky Divine Range, Sovereign Palace. Beast Sovereign was sitting on the main seat, looking at the figure in the palace. It was the disheveled man who had been staring at Zhou Xuanji before. His face was still covered by his grass-like hair, only revealing a pair of eyes. "Are you sure?" Beast Sovereign asked in a cold voice with a cold face. The disheveled man said with a strange smile, "Yes, Zhou Xuanji has power that surpasses the sovereign." Hearing this, Beast Sovereign furrowed his brow and fell into silence. Such an existence has appeared in the Kunlun Origin Court. If he doesn't die, he will definitely become a great sovereign. You either find a way to eradicate him and seize his opportunity, or leave the Kunlun Origin Court and go to another court realm to make a comeback. The disheveled man said leisurely. The disheveled man said slowly and closed his eyes. After a long while, Beast Sovereign asked, "What are the other court realms like?" The disheveled man opened his eyes and replied with a smile, "It's more exciting than the Kunlun Origin Court. The sovereigns of the Kunlun Origin Court are opening up court realms outside, constantly creating. The outside world is far more exciting than the Kunlun Origin Court. Of course, it's also more dangerous than the Kunlun Origin Court. All the sovereigns are chasing after a supreme treasure. Once you get that supreme treasure, you can command all the sovereigns and become a supreme ruler." Beast Sovereign furrowed his brow and asked, "Why can you command all the sovereigns?" The sovereigns were the strongest experts of an era. How could they be controlled by a supreme treasure? The disheveled man replied, "Everything has a starting point. The same is true for the origin of the sovereigns. In the vast court realms, there are 3 supreme opportunities. One of them is the sovereign divine power. Once you grasp the sovereign divine power, all the sovereigns must surrender. Otherwise, they will turn into ashes. After all, the establishment of the sovereigns is derived from the 3,000 origin rules. Rules can make the sovereigns, but they can also overthrow the sovereigns." Beast Sovereign's eyes widened. He was shocked by the other party's words. His eyes lit up with the fire of hope. He curiously asked, "Apart from the sovereign divine power, what are the other 2 great opportunities and supreme treasures?" The disheveled man shook his head and replied, "No one knows." His tone was a little sad. He couldn't tell the vicissitudes of life outside the court. Many supremes had risked their lives for the sake of the 3 supreme fortuitous encounters. The sovereign divine power alone was enough to make the sovereigns fight to the death. If the other two supreme opportunities appeared, what kind of scene would it be? All right, this sovereign has decided to go outside the court. But before that, an eye for an eye. An eye for an eye. The corner of Beast Sovereign's mouth rose as he declared with a murderous smile. After 3 years, Zhou Xuanji sent Chang Xian to inquire about the news. Li Xianhuang and Xu Longhua had returned. The spirit-controlling evil insects had strangely disappeared. The creatures controlled by them were also nowhere to be seen. It was as if they had evaporated. This matter didn't cause too much of a stir in the Kunlun Origin Court. The main theme was still the sovereign list. The Qinxiong Divine Range, which had always been low-key, suddenly made a high-profile announcement. They wanted to gather all the powerful cultivators and geniuses on the sovereign list in one place to fight for the position of the new sovereign. The Qinxiong Divine Range was also a sovereign divine range. Their words carried a lot of weight. As soon as this statement came out, many creatures expressed their support. The emergence of the sovereign list had caused powerful cultivators and geniuses to fight everywhere. Although it was very lively, it would also make all living beings bored after a long time. The Qinxiong Divine Range also sent invitations to everyone on the sovereign list to fight in the universe area at the center of the Kunlun Origin Court. Zhou Xuanji took the invitation from Chang Xian's hand and asked with a faint smile, "Are there any people from the Qinxiong Divine Range on the sovereign list?" Chang Xian nodded and replied, "Yes, there are about 800 of them. All of them are above the 5 vast heavens realm. Although they're not as many as the super divine ranges, each and every one of them is a powerful existence. The highest ranked is Chu Jing, who is ranked 4th on the sovereign list. He broke through to the Origin Fusion Divine Lord 8 comprehensions 200 years ago." You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.